Chapter 437. Alright, you've passed all the tests. Now you can take your reward. Morgan Le Fay's doppelganger closed the parchment and summoned the golden cube that the skeleton was hugging, hinting for Thea to come forward and take it. Chem? What's the meaning of this? Thea initially thought that the reward was really this cube, but she soon realized that something was wrong. Not to mention the actual use of this thing, just the fact that it was a part of a trap meant that Morgan didn't value this thing at all. Morgan and Merlin fought for 3 days and 3 nights, and then worked together to deduce the clues. She was afraid that it was all fake. This skeleton was also a bit fake. Thea didn't believe that Morgan would engrave such a low-level spell like charm on his bones. That was too low. Most importantly, there were only 98 questions in the tests. As long as she read a few more books, she would know that there was 1 or 2 more tests. Perhaps the cube itself was also a test. Taking this cube now was definitely a stupid thing to do. Thea stood still and shook her head. I don't want it. You really don't want it. It contains the truth of the universe. I don't want it. The blonde doppelganger sighed and put away the golden cube and parchment. You've passed the last test. Come and take your real reward. After saying that, she reached out and wiped the space, and a pool of dark blue lake water suddenly appeared in the dark room. The water rippled. This wasn't the so-called mountain spring water of modern society. It was clear and transparent, and the water contained bursts of vitality. Along with the slight undulation of the water, one could hear the lake water hitting the shore and smell waves of moving fragrance. This is... Thea was finally a bit moved. She didn't expect the blonde Morgan Le Fay to answer her, because she recognized this pool of water from the source of her bloodline. This was a part of the elven kingdom of Avalon, the habitat of the goddess of the lake. It was different from the Avalon she had summoned that day. That was just a projection from a distant space, and didn't even reflect 1% of its power. The pool in front of her was only the size of a few people hugging it. It looked like it was only a small part of the original area, but the magic it contained seemed to be telling her something. This was real, or it could be said that Morgan Le Fay had cut out a part of the past and placed it in the present world, in front of Thea's eyes. Such a miraculous method was obviously not done by the silly clone. This was a gift personally left behind by King Arthur's sister, Morgan Le Fay, who had fought with King Arthur all his life, but who had carried him back to Avalon at the last moment of King Arthur's life. Anyone who knew the story of King Arthur would know that after the sword in the stone was broken, he received Merlin's guidance and obtained the sword in the lake from the goddess of the lake in Avalon. It was the widely spread sword of victory and oath. Thea felt her heart beating a little too fast. She quickly turned around to look at the blonde Morgan Le Fay's clone, hoping to get some pointers. Thea had lost gems many times before, so they were still very valuable. The golden-haired woman scratched her head, nodded at her, and made a throwing gesture. Throw things into the water. Then the goddess ran out. Is this the golden axe you lost? This story doesn't seem to be set in England. Thea was a little stumped. After she lost another 3 gems, the silly doppelganger instructed her in a low voice, you have to let the goddess of the lake see your confidence and courage. Then, it ran away quickly. Obviously, this was the limit of what it could reveal. Confidence and courage? Thea was deep in thought. The lake was very shallow, so it shouldn't be a test of superficial courage like jumping in, and it also wasn't a test of honesty like the golden and silver axes. Then, there was only one result, the courage to be willing and the confidence to persevere. She threw a gem into the lake, and the lake water spat it out quickly like a grape peel. Obviously, the other party didn't want this thing. Thea tried a dagger, a long sword, a round shield, a wrist guard, a helmet, and a lot of other modern products. Except for the long sword, everything else was rejected. She must have set her sights on the long swords. Shia was a little scared as she threw a few long swords into the lake. The lake water only swelled up, and she could vaguely hear the banshees singing. As a female, she was completely immune to this kind of singing. However, the other party's message was very clear. Continue. You can't trap a wolf without risking your child. Thea took out a long sword with a magic circle engraved on it from her space ring. This was a gift she prepared for Thea's 8th birthday. The body of the sword was made by Diana, and the magic circle was drawn by Thea herself. The sharpness of the sword was almost indestructible. She threw it in with a whoosh. The lake water was filled with cheerful emotions, but the goddess of the lake still didn't appear. Thea took out a few swords that the Church of the Cold Flame had offered as a tribute. Some could increase the wearer's charm, some could automatically become invisible when held in the hand, and some could let the wielder breathe underwater. Her heart was bleeding. She threw them in one by one. The lake water was already showing signs of boiling, and a few faint whirlpools were forming, but some key forces were still missing. She was so greedy. Thea felt her blood pressure rising. She only had 3 swords left in her hands. They were the fake Godslayer she obtained from Paradise Island, the real Ars Must Die sword, the nameless magic sword forged by the demons, and the Merlin sword. The Godslayer was rarely used now. Logically speaking, this sword should be the first to be used as a sacrifice. However, Thea thought of her feelings for Diana, and the symbolic meaning of this sword was greater than its actual meaning. The magic sword was also rarely used in battle. Thea valued its ability to absorb and its high quality. This sword was a key tool to deal with Black Adam in the future, so she couldn't give it up now. Then the only choice left was the Merlin sword. This sword faintly resonated with her bloodline, and contained a trace of luck. Thea had just tasted the sweetness of it, and she didn't want to give it up. Was this a test of courage? The Godslayer represented feelings, the magic sword represented the future, and the Merlin sword represented luck. She had to make a choice between the 3 swords. After a few mental struggles, Thea made the final decision. The strong needed feelings and a future, but they didn't need luck. Would Doomsday let her go because she was lucky? Earth had been pierced through, so what was the use of having high luck? Reason told her that it was easiest to give up feelings. She had to pay a small price for a big gain. Thea shook her head. Feelings were necessary for her as an individual. It was easy to give them up, but the price was too high. The feelings here weren't just love and family, but all of them. If she gave up love today, she would give up family and friendship tomorrow. In the end, she would have nothing left. Feelings were the fetters of an intelligent life. It wasn't a restriction, but a source of power. It was the starting point of all thinking. If she only wanted to survive in the beginning, then today, feelings were the cornerstone that made her work hard, the motivation to climb to the top. Without her family and lovers, what was the point of being invincible? Chapter 438. Now that she understood her own principles, there were no strange phenomena like those in novels. She could only feel a sense of relief. Sia vaguely realized that this sword might be what the goddess of the lake really needed. After all, it was a bit funny to give a sword from Greek mythology and a sword from hell to a Celtic god. Merlin's sword and the goddess of the lake were of the same origin. Returning it to her was the right thing to do, right? Thea wrinkled her nose and silently apologized to Ancestor Merlin in her heart. She reached out and broke the necklace. The sword was enlarged to a standard size. Holding the sword with both hands, she gently threw it into the lake. Merlin's sword did not sink to the bottom directly like the previous swords. Instead, it emitted a faint white light and slowly sank. The sirens singing and the sound of waves hitting the shore disappeared in a flash. Only Morgan Le Fay's avatar could be heard AO and disappeared without a trace. Sia stared at the surface of the lake nervously. The waves parted to the left and right steadily. The lake water, which had only reached her feet before, deepened visibly. A gorgeous goddess in a sky-blue peacock sleeves, a long dress, and emerald crystal earrings slowly rose from the water. A true god. A true god from the past borrowed some means to temporarily connect to the present world. The goddess of the lake's divine power was not vast, but the external feeling she gave was incomparably natural. As long as one was beside her, one could feel her unparalleled calmness and longing for the future. Thea had only seen such an experience of facing a true god in her prime once before. At that time, the goddess of the moon shot an arrow from the distant past in order to cut off the mark on the elk. However, Thea's level was still a little low at that time. The power in her body was like water without roots. She could only watch the show in the fog. What she actually understood and what she learned were all nonsense. Although Thea had not yet reached the stage where she was angry with Horus, this was her own timeline. The world did not reject her. Her vision and knowledge were far better than the empty shell with only power. The goddess of the lake today could let her see a lot of things. Her character and inner thoughts were not the path she wanted to take, but this close feeling of the goddess of the lake's power still benefited her a lot. The goddess of the lake did not speak. She just held her hands flat as if she was holding something and walked slowly towards her. Thea heard shouts of encouragement and support. Of course, there were also doubts and questions. She didn't know if this was real or just a figment of her imagination. She tidied up her clothes and walked steadily into the lake. Thea clenched and unclenched her fists a few times. In a tenth of a second, she recalled her experience in the past 5 years. She took a deep breath and reached for the empty hands of the goddess of the lake. It had a physical body. When Thea placed her finger on the outside of the left wrist of the goddess of the lake, where she suspected the hilt, the solid touch told her that all the previous efforts were worth it. This legendary holy sword had crossed the distance of time and space and was about to be reborn. As she touched it, the shape of the sword gradually revealed itself. Upon closer inspection, one would discover that the azure sword hilt was made from a starstone that could emit a faint light even in the abyss. The blade was in the shape of a half-moon. It was made of a metal that the ancient mags called the Earth's core gold. Thea's magic sword also contained a small amount of Earth's core gold, but the amount was very small. This blade was a whole piece of Earth's core gold that was smelted with the fire of the sun. However, these precious materials were just a foil. The 1.2-meter-long blade was the real treasure. It was not gold, copper, or iron. The blade was thin and light. Thea shook her wrist, and a variety of colors emerged. The bottom of the blade was engraved with the inscription Excalibur in Old English, which meant to break steel. However, modern society gave this sword a more unique name, the Sword of Victory and Pledge. The ancient mags could not recognize the material of this sword, but Sia was all too familiar with it. It was the same material as the Ring of Lamps, except that it was of a higher grade and grander. This was an ultimate holy sword that relied on the emotions of intelligent life forms and was created through imagination. Unlike the single emotion of the Ring of Light, the emotions contained in this sword could be said to be extremely rich. At least, the few emotions that Thea knew, such as anger, jealousy, fear, courage, pity, hope, and love, were all contained in this sword. It was the same as the Ring of Light. Inputting one's emotions, it would emit a light that was countless times more dazzling than the sun, destroying everything. This was the combination of the thoughts of all living beings. To reach this level, Thea still had a long way to go. The premise to fully exert the power of the Holy Sword was to control all emotions. Her own emotions, the emotions of the outside world, the good, the bad, and the evil. In the face of the attack of all intelligent life and the combined thoughts of all living beings, presumably those who could not be named would also retreat. The goddess of the lake sent out the sword, and it gently brushed Thea's cheek like a spring breeze. Her hands were warm and soft, like a dancing evening wind, taking away all her worries and also smoothing out her slightly frowned brows. From the beginning to the end, the goddess of the lake did not say a word. She smiled and slowly retreated, and the light of the lake separated again, and the slight waves brought her back to her peaceful hometown. Thea watched her disappear into the lake and bowed deeply. At this time, any words would be useless, and the goddess of the lake did not say anything. Thea also understood her intentions. Just like King Arthur, this was the choice of fate, and also her own choice. Did that guy leave? The originally silent atmosphere was instantly broken by the golden-haired Morgan Le Fay's doppelganger. This very amusing fellow had actually conjured a wall in the spacious and empty dark room. He leaned against the wall as he carefully looked around. Thea was too lazy to pay attention to him, and she casually waved the sword twice. This sword was fine just holding it, but as long as one had the intention to fight, the sword would become very heavy. She tried to inject fear into the sword, but the sword could only be said to be a little lighter, and it was still far from being able to be used freely. Thea was stronger than King Arthur in that she knew the existence of the emotional spectrum, and she knew about the 7-lantern core. As long as she could wear the 7 lantern rings, she could at least use half of the sword's power. Sister Morgan, do you know where the scabbard is? I can't always carry it, right? Thea tried to put the sword into the space ring, and could only turn to ask the blonde. The scabbard is much more important than the sword. When my original body discussed with that guy, he did not mention the scabbard. The blonde Morgan touched her chin and thought for a while before answering. The guy she was talking about was the goddess of the lake. It seemed that it was not easy to get a bargain, and the gods were not stupid. Thea certainly knew that the scabbard was more important. Originally, she wanted to see if she could get the scabbard, but today had given her a lot of surprises, so she was in a very good mood and did not continue to worry about the scabbard. Chapter 439. Isolated from the world, this scabbard was even more powerful than the holy sword. It could protect the wielder from all attacks, immune to the passage of time, and immune to magic attacks. It could even be said that the scabbard itself represented the word magic. This was the top law of the world. As the wielder of the current generation's sword of victory and pledge, Thea could faintly hear the call of the scabbard. It was just that the distance was beyond her understanding. It wasn't on Earth, it wasn't in the outer space, it wasn't in the material plane, and it wasn't even in the timeline. Thea shook her head and collected her thoughts. She couldn't even use the power of the sword. It was too unrealistic to expect a scabbard now. Sister Morgan. This is... Thea was still thinking about the future when she saw the blonde woman drag 3 stone slabs out of the void with great effort. This is the reward left by the original body for the test. The blonde woman wiped the non-existent sweat on her forehead and said vaguely. Thea was a little dazed. She looked at the sword in her hand. Then what was that just now? That was the test of the goddess of the lake. You didn't think that the original body would reward you with a warrior's sword, did you? We're mags. Of course the reward is related to mags, the blonde woman said while looking at Thea as if she were stupid. Thea didn't want to argue with her about warrior and mage. The meaning of the holy sword was far beyond such a mundane definition. This clone looked mature and beautiful, but in fact, her intelligence was not as good as Damien's. There was no harm in following her words. This was the only experience she had in dealing with naughty children in the past 2 years. The dark grey stone slabs were very heavy. 2 of them emitted a faint white light, while the other one was shrouded in a faint black aura. Thea gently placed her hand on the stone slab that emitted a white light. The stone slab's surface was incomparably smooth, but when one's spirit power penetrated it, one would discover that the stone slab contained a wealth of knowledge. Morgan Le Fay might have anticipated the language barrier of the future generations. She was like Thea who read minds outside, skipping the language barrier and directly using her spirit power to leave her own magic and experience inside the stone slab. Huh! Thea, who had always been calm, could not help but exclaim softly. This evil sorcerer, who was known for his black magic, had left behind a large number of medical spells. Much of the knowledge was related to modern medicine, but it would take a lot of time to read all of them. The 2 white stone slabs contained medical knowledge, while the last black stone slab recorded necromancy and black magic. This knowledge was far more precious than Sargon's memories. In essence, it made up for the shortcomings of Thea's profound theories. It was what she needed the most right now. Big Sister Morgan, what level has your main body reached? Can one really reach the peak by simply accumulating magic power? To be honest, Thea wasn't very sure about her future. She couldn't compare to Superman and his gang. In this era where the old gods had passed away and the new gods were born, she didn't even know who to ask if she wanted to reach the top. She just walked forward like a blind person groping for an elephant. She could not find the answer on Earth, and there was no way she could go to planet Tianchi and knock on Darkseid's door. Hey, Blue Fatty, tell me how to become the god of magic. Darkseid could kill her in seconds. Previously, she had thought that she could become a god naturally after obtaining the divine power of Black Adam and Shazan. However, after a brief interaction with the goddess of the lake, she realized that she had been too naive. She might need power, but so did her level. She always felt that she was lacking something compared to these gods. This was the real reason why she had asked Morgan's clone. It was rare for the blonde Morgan to be so serious. He sized up Sia from head to toe with a probing gaze. Your main body must have left this world. As for you, you haven't grasped your true power. The blonde Morgan stroked her chin and pointed at the unicorn tattoo on Thea's shoulder. This thing not only gives you power, but it also limits your future achievements. You can only reach the top if you become one with it again. Become one with the tattoo again? I don't quite understand what you mean. Thea didn't expect to get such an answer. You call this a tattoo? Alright, it's up to you. Your tattoo is actually a reflection of your inner self. Light and darkness, hero and criminal, these are the choices that fate has given you. But you went against the arrangement of fate. You walked on a completely new path. Your several possible futures were condensed into this tattoo. It represents what you could become. You must completely embrace everything about you, such as justice, evil, rationality, passion, and all these other things. Morgan's clone was a little stumbling as she explained. It was obvious that she was very enthusiastic about helping Thea, but there were many words that she did not know how to express. However, Thea roughly understood. Wasn't she talking about her original fate? It was just that she had already jumped out of her original framework. Thea didn't expect that. She thought that she had said goodbye to her past, but the power of her bloodline had pulled some remnants back. Did she need to completely merge with the light and darkness in the unicorn tattoo? Merging was easy, but her personality would change drastically. Would she still be herself? Is there a way for me to maintain the fusion of my current personality? This question really stumped Morgan's clone. She furrowed her beautiful eyebrows and thought carefully. Perhaps you can try to remove some of the negative effects by increasing your mental strength to an extremely high level. Mental strength. Thea was no stranger to this attribute. When she first practiced martial arts, it was her perception. Now, it was her mental strength. Due to the fusion of transmigrators, she had always been strong in this aspect. However, it was very difficult to improve it through daily training. She had to cultivate it in a special environment and place. Alright, I've told you everything I know. I'm going to sleep. Come and play with me when you're free. Sister Morgan hurriedly waved her hand. Thea only saw a blur in front of her eyes before she appeared outside the temple. The moon was bright outside, and the soft moonlight sprinkled on the road. She roughly estimated the time. She arrived at the temple in the evening. After that, she didn't spend too much time investigating and searching. Most of her time was spent on answering Morgan's 99 questions. The moment she left the temple and entered the outside world, the connection between her and the Sword of Victory and Pledge became closer. Unlike Merlin's sword, which was connected by blood, the meaning of the sacred sword's transmission was a kind of responsibility and heavy burden. The relationship between her and the sword was a bit like that of a revolutionary comrade. The sacred sword made a soft buzzing sound. Thea understood its meaning. She softly chanted the inscriptions on the sword. The sacred sword turned into a ball of illusory energy and entered her arm. She took out her communication device to check the time. She had been in the temple for 3 days. Thea didn't leave immediately. She found a big tree and lay on it. She looked at the moonlight and began to think about her future path. Chapter 440. The unicorn was still very young. It had just entered adulthood and couldn't express itself clearly. Thea summoned her doppelganger and wanted to ask her opinion. We are you. As long as you make up your mind, you don't have to worry about our opinions. We are a whole. This is your future and the choice you can make. When our existence hinders your path, you should make your real choice. The doppelganger said calmly before vanishing like a puff of smoke. Become a Chunibya like the unicorn? Or become a gloomy doppelganger? Thea muttered to herself in the empty night sky. She quickly shook her head. This was not what she needed. Light was not justice, and the shadow was not evil. It had nothing to do with right and wrong. It was just that she didn't like it and didn't want it. The fusion was not urgent. She needed to make more plans and preparations. As for Morgan Le Fay's so-called spiritual power, it was something that could be done at the moment. Although her body's magical power was profound and her knowledge was extensive, she might not know the real secrets of this world. Among these secrets, Thea could think of a sacred place to cultivate spiritual power. Nandabat. Of course, it was not the place called the base camp of the ninja master, which was actually a cellar. It was in the crevice between the mountains and valleys, material and illusory. There was a paradise that was rich in high-level energy. When the ninja master chose this place, Thea felt that it was most likely the three-palace demon behind him who spied on it across many planes. He saw that this place was different. Unfortunately, the distance was too far. Even with the strength of the great demon king, he could not find the real secret place. If the current Earthlings were the 5th generation and Atlantis was the 4th generation, this place was the treasure left behind by the original civilization of the Earth. Aware that their civilization was about to be destroyed, on the eve of the upheaval, these wise men of the ancient civilization gathered the spiritual power of the entire race and forcibly opened up a space. All of their people abandoned their material bodies and lived here in the form of spiritual power to avoid the inevitable disaster from the outside world. The original plan was good. Their spiritual power was preserved, and to a certain extent, they were immortal. However, the 2nd and 3rd generation civilizations of the Earth appeared one after another. Without the support of a physical body for a long time, even the leaders with iron will could not withstand the erosion and baptism of time. They had forgotten their names and their mission. Tens of thousands of years of emptiness had caused them to be severely polarized. The kind were more kind, and the evil were more evil. The weak spiritual bodies were all abandoned. Many champions walked out of the spiritual space, some helping the new civilization to build a new home, while others hated these people for taking their place, stirring up trouble and committing all kinds of evil. They had all forgotten that the other party was once their kin, and the result of attacking each other was the destruction of all of them. As the world changed, civilized societies continued to rise and fall, and after that, a new cycle began. Their weak clansmen had been left behind in that eternal spiritual space. Even in the books of the gods, which claimed to be omniscient, there were very few records of their former glory. They had been completely forgotten, both physically and spiritually. When Zeus and the other gods fell into a deep slumber, mankind entered the 5th era. Many devout monks, bishops, and imams of Tantric Buddhism had their spiritual power skyrocketed before they died. They vaguely saw that place. From the few words they left behind, mankind named that place Paradise Lost, Heaven, Pure Land, and so on. Of course, this was the definition and perception of heaven by secular religions, not the heaven that actually existed. Thea arranged her own matters and came to this area alone. She wanted to find the entrance to Paradise Lost. After the great event of eternity of evil, the evil of the world would converge with the spiritual bodies here to form a new evil god, which would then be purified by Boston Brand. However, that was something that would happen a long time later, so it wasn't worth Thea's worry. Without alerting Talia and the others in Nandabat, she dressed up like a traveler, bypassed the Assassin League's headquarters, and walked alone into the deep mountains. The civilized world was left behind by her. She was surrounded by towering mountains and rocks. Not to mention humans, even animals couldn't be seen here. The young mistress' body was now astonishing. She walked steadily in the wilderness, taking out Croydon's compass from time to time to confirm her position. She had to admit that this item that Constantine had been thinking about was sometimes useless, but sometimes its effects were heaven-defying. Sia had done a lot of homework before she came here. She had borrowed all the records that mentioned this area, including the notes of several religious leaders before their deaths, under various pretenses. However, the records were all illusory, and she was confused when she read them. After that, she also used the blood connection to find old Ma, who was now very beautiful, and asked the Lady of Shangju to do a divination. The divination result was disappointing. 5 cards jumped out at once, and the area covered the 5 continents. The Lady of Shangju was stunned. Thea realized that she could only rely on herself. She began to use all kinds of satellite positioning, carbon detection, supercomputer simulation, spiritual power scanning, and magic power sensing. However, all of these things added together were not as effective as the Croydon's compass. This compass completely taught her what it meant to specialize in a field. A magic item that could catch the eye of Constantine, the son of the DC world, was not just for show. The compass followed her instructions to find the place with the richest spiritual power. At first, there were some disturbances, and then it would deviate from the direction from time to time, but generally speaking, it was gradually getting closer. The young mistress did not fly. She was afraid of missing some key points, and this matter could not be left to others. She could only follow the compass's guidance and walk in this primitive forest step by step. On the third day, she had walked through most of the mountain range, but found nothing. On the 15th day, she went back to take care of some business. After several confirmations, she realized that she had walked past the target entrance. She could only continue to search in the opposite direction. On the 19th day, Diana also accompanied her to search. Wonder Woman was also very helpless. Her lasso of truth could not trap the mountain and ask. She did not even know who to ask. The two found an open space and had a friendly discussion. The young mistress sent off Diana in high spirits. On the 25th day, she finally found a clue. The place she was now in was ordinary. There was no light, no purple gas, and nothing on the ground except two big stones. However, this was the strange part. Thea had an excellent memory. She had walked through this coordinate 3 times in just over 20 days. Her route had been recorded by Gideon. She had walked through the entire mountain area twice without any blind spots. Along the way, according to the compass's guidance, there were 7 or 8 places that she had walked through the same place twice, but only this place was the same place 3 times in a row. Chapter 441. Thea took out her compass and paced around. The needle of the compass went from south to north, and when she reached a certain point, it spun like a windmill. It's here. She sat in the same place. After more than 20 days of searching, she was exhausted. She still had plenty of physical strength, but she was mentally exhausted. She needed to recover and face any unexpected situations in a relatively good state. There's nothing in the sky, so it must be underground. Sia did not simply close her eyes to rest. In the original timeline, it was Nicknecro who messed around. He was tricked by the fake magic book and caused a series of changes in Nandabat. Only then did Paradise Lost reveal a tentacle from the spiritual world. Now, nothing happened. This small world had been hidden for tens of thousands of years, avoiding the prying eyes of countless true gods. Its hiding ability could be said to be very unique. Thea first used several detection methods of Sargon and Morgan Le Fay to explore the spatial structure here, and the results were very satisfying. Several spells transmitted the point under her feet. Although it was weak, it did have the meaning of an interlayer. After that, she began to search for the entrance, and the Eye of Horus was fully activated. From where she sat, she could almost see Mars, but she didn't see anything. This proved that the entrance was not in the sky. She turned her head and continued to search the ground, but after only seeing through 2 layers of rocks, she couldn't see any further. Her line of sight encountered an invisible energy, and then it was absorbed. It's underground. Thea was overjoyed. After busying herself for nearly a month, it was finally time to reveal it. She took out the God of Death's staff. This staff could sink the continent. Even now in the hands of an outsider, Thea, its power was less than 10%, but a simple hole was no problem. The staff gently touched the ground, and she felt the throbbing of the veins. This artifact of Atlantis clearly told her that there was a cave under the rocks. Thea no longer hesitated. She flew into the air, held the staff with both hands, pointed the top of the staff at the ground, and used all her strength to strike it down. Rumble. The power of this staff could be said to be earth-shattering, and the vibrations could be felt from several miles away. Countless rocks fell, and a large number of trees were knocked down. The wild beasts that lived in the mountains ran out of their nests. Even the base camp of the Assassin Alliance at the outermost perimeter of the mountain area was affected by the tremors. The smug Talia thought that it was an earthquake and hurriedly ran out of the cave with a group of people, looking around nervously. Thea did not have the time to care about their feelings. She looked at the big hole she made and grit her teeth. This power was a little too strong. The hole had a diameter of more than 30 meters and was so deep that one couldn't see the bottom. This hole was so deep that the drilling team could work for at least half a year with the toughest drill bit. Thea was now completely confused about the function of this staff. This staff could only be said to be okay against enemies, but against Earth. How much did the King of Death hate Atlantis back then? A magical weapon of the water attribute was actually made into a weapon for digging holes. Thea put away her unspoken criticism of the King of Death and waited for the smoke to dissipate. Then she flew down the hole. After only flying for half a minute, a cool breeze blew against her face. There was not much stale smell in the air, but it was fresh and comfortable. When she landed at the bottom, she saw countless snowflake stones, stalagmites, stone pillars, and stone towers. The surroundings were as pure and beautiful as snow. It seems that this place has been blocked by the rocks for a long time. Thea looked around. There was no other way around except for the skylight she made. She reached out and touched a nearby stalagmite. This was not a natural creation, but a condensation of some kind of mental strength. She suppressed her excitement, knowing that the entrance was just ahead. The scenery in the cave could be described as extremely beautiful. The deeper she went, the more snowflake stones were condensed by mental strength. The spectacular and gorgeous scenery could be seen everywhere. Thea did not pay too much attention to the scenery, ignoring the deep silence around her, and walked steadily and firmly. There were many winding paths inside the cave. Along the way, the strength of the snowflake stones guided her. According to the strength of the energy, the closer she got to the entrance of the cave, the stronger it would be. She stopped in front of a 40-meter-tall statue of a petrified dragon. The statue was lifelike. This dragon, or a creature that looked like a dragon, had 2 heads, and its body was not as slender as what Thea had seen in the magic books. This dragon's body was sturdy, its back was high, and it also had 2 tails, but they were very short. The dragon statue was huge and blocked all the back paths. Thea looked and said loudly, "Behind you is the entrance, right? I'm not a bad person. Can you let me in? Did you hear me? You're not dead, are you? If you don't move, don't blame me for being rude. I know you're still alive." Thea shouted for a long time, but the dragon did not respond. She could only hold the Death King's staff tightly and get into an attacking posture. The dragon knew that it could not hide it anymore. It quickly absorbed the weathered crystals on the surface of its body. In less than half a minute, its body was finally revealed. It moved slightly and breathed out a cloud of mist. A dragon without a physical body? At first, Sia thought that it was a giant dragon, but when it revealed its true form, she realized that she was wrong. This guy was another life form, not a natural life form at all. To put it in an inaccurate way, it was more like a giant dragon made of pure spiritual power. "You can't go in, you don't have permission." The dragon did not have a voice, and naturally could not speak. It used telepathy to speak. "Human, back off. I know you're not a bad person, I don't want to be your enemy. I have a reason to go in." Thea had been busy for a month, how could she be stopped by this guy? "No. Please, I have to go in." "No." Thea tried her best, but the other party was extremely rigid and refused to let her in. The other party's strength was not too strong. Thea felt that it was similar to the Charm Witch. It had sufficient mental strength, but its body was stiff, and it needed a huge amount of mental strength to maintain the movement of its body. It could not even exert 30% of its strength. To deal with this kind of guy without a physical body, she could only use a large amount of magic to fight a battle of attrition. But it was different now. She smiled and took out the Sword of Victory and Pledge. This fantasy-type holy sword was a collection of the will of all living beings. It had already reached the peak of mental influence, and could be said to be the ultimate nemesis of all mental creatures. "Hey, take a look at my sword." "Ooh." The 2-headed dragon's mental body flickered when the holy sword was taken out. Although it had never seen the sword, it could see the structure of the sword clearly. This sword could casually stab 100 or 80 creatures like it, which were made of spiritual energy. It was fine to deal with enemies with physical bodies, but to deal with an incorporeal body like it It felt like it would die without a cause. It was a little scared. Chapter 442. However, the dragon was very stubborn. It knew that Thea's sword could kill it easily, but it still insisted on its duty and stood at the entrance, looking at her nervously. The young lady was in a bit of a dilemma. The sword of oath and victory was powerful, that was true. It also had a lot of restrictions. The spirit power dragon in front of her was loyal to its duty, and the holy sword didn't want to hurt it. If Thea forced herself to control it, there would be a barrier between her and the sword. Both sides would have a bad first impression, and it would be difficult to change it later. From another point of view, the dragon was both a guardian and an extraditor. Without its support, Thea couldn't enter that illusory world. Feeling that she didn't do anything further, the spirit power dragon was secretly relieved. It was not afraid of death, but it wouldn't ask for it either. After hesitating for a while, it proposed a compromise that it didn't think violated the rules. Find someone who is qualified to enter Paradise Lost and let him invite you in. That's my biggest concession. Thea smiled. She could accept this result. As you wish, Guardian. After that, she sat down. If it was someone else who met this condition, it would be hard to do. There were 6 billion people on Earth, who was qualified and who wasn't. It would be hard to find a clue in the sea of people. But she knew this plot. Thea came here because of this plot. She knew who was qualified to enter this place. Many years ago, there was a little boy who entered the paradise of negligence in his dream. The reason was unknown, and the purpose was unknown. He thought that everything was just a happy dream. In fact, there was a real world inside, a world that was completely made up of spiritual power. This boy was none other than the dead man, Boston Brand. He had little contact with Thea, but he saw her as a god in his mind. The spirit power dragon was a bit surprised that Thea was sitting still. Logically speaking, shouldn't she be looking for someone who was qualified to enter Paradise Lost? Was she going to sit still and protest? But it was very patient. It was not in a hurry to turn back into a stone statue, so it also lay on the ground. Patience. It had lived alone for hundreds of millions of years, and the thing it didn't lack the most was patience. However, in less than 10 minutes, it was dumbfounded. A dead man in a red tights floated in. As a guardian, it could tell that this unknown life form was qualified to enter Paradise Lost. Excluding the 1 in a billion chance that it happened to pass by, it was not hard to guess that it was summoned here. Now, the conflict between Hal Jordan and Sinisto was becoming more and more intense. As Hal's friend and Sinisto's subordinate in name, Dead Man had been living on Earth all this time, fooling around every day. Boss, your place is really hard to find. The dead man was suspended in the air. He complained, but he was a little vigilant in his heart. He focused on looking at the spirit dragon, wondering if he should beat this big guy up later. The spirit dragon pondered for a few seconds. Human king with the sacred sword, I will keep my promise and bring you into Paradise Lost. However, your body will not be able to enter. That is a world made of spirit. Thea was very happy. A human king with the sacred sword. This dragon was quite good at talking. When she planned to find Paradise Lost, she knew that her body would not be able to enter. This small problem could be solved by the sacred sword. The sacred sword gathered the will and imagination of all living beings. Its functions were as diverse as the stars in the sky. Holding the sword hilt made of starstone, one person and one sword communicated with each other. A power was transmitted from the sword. This was the power of imagination, it could make the impossible possible. Thea's body gradually dimmed. The body that was originally made of matter turned into spirit. From reality to illusion, she turned into a heroic spirit. This was one of the functions of the sacred sword. It allowed the wielder to freely change between reality and illusion. There were no side effects and no time limit. Thea, who was already strong in spirit, now received the feedback from her body. Her spirit body was more than 3 meters tall, and it took her a long time to return to her normal size. The sacred sword in her hand also shone brightly. The two of them complemented each other. The sacred sword gave the heroic spirit power, and the heroic spirit gave the sacred sword new emotions. In the eyes of the dead person and the spirit dragon, Thea was now as bright as a moving sun. Only she knew that her spirit power was affected by the unicorn clone. It was far from reaching the upper limit of her energy level. The purity, firmness, and spirit now were all given by the sacred sword. Only by increasing the total amount of her spirit power and abandoning their characteristics and absorbing two clones of the same origin, could she finally complete the concept of self. Looking at Thea's heroic spirit, the spirit dragon did not make any excuses. It turned around helplessly. "Get on my back, I will bring you in." "Where are we going?" "I have a date tonight." The dead person flew onto the dragon's back and turned to ask Thea. The young lady could only explain her purpose. "Wait. Do you mean that I have been here before?" The dead person pointed at the rapidly spinning passage around them. Although he was already incorporeal, he still hugged the dragon's neck tightly. He looked around and asked Thea with uncertainty. "Yes, Boston Brand. You were one of the visitors here in a time that you have forgotten." The dragon was very friendly to him. "This is the gap between the universe, time, and space. No matter how long you stay here, it will only be a night in the outside world. With my guidance, you will be safe." Thea sat on the dragon's back silently. The passage around her was emitting a psychedelic red light. With just a casual glance, she saw countless people and countless affairs, wars, plagues, celebrations, and harvests. Countless good and bad things were presented before her eyes. Even with her current brain power, it was tiring to accept so much information at the same time. Endless passages and endless universes spun before her eyes. She simply closed her eyes and focused on communicating with the sacred sword that she had absorbed into her body. The dragon explained and stopped talking. It could be seen that it was also a quiet person. After that, the short journey was left with the screams of the dead person. "That two-story building over there seems to be my house in Gotham. Hey, brother, aren't you a dragon? Why are you spinning while flying? How long will it take? You won't keep flying until you die, right? Although I'm already dead. You're spinning too fast. I think I'm the first dead person in history to vomit out a spirit stomach." Sia's forehead popped up like a watermelon. This guy was too talkative. "Shut up, dead person." Although that was what she said, the dead person could not be blamed. The dragon was like an acrobat, rolling continuously in the countless passages. Thea only felt that she was spinning with him. At first, she was sitting still like a grandmaster. Later, she could not stand it anymore. She hugged the other neck of the dragon and watched it gradually fly into the depths of the passage. Chapter 443. Time seemed to have lost its meaning here. Thea was like a traveler who had fallen into a quagmire. She hugged the dragon's neck and watched it perform its flying skills as if it was courting death. The dead people who were shouting beside her were also completely speechless. Only the dragon was still happily drilling towards the end of the passage. Thea felt that this fellow must be taking revenge on her for scaring it with the holy sword. Otherwise, why would it drill into the 100-meter-wide passage in a spiral? It was too late to say anything now. She could only hope that this path would end soon. After enduring for an unknown amount of time, her heroic spirit body felt that she had passed through a tough barrier. The fiery red passage was replaced by a dazzling golden light. "We're finally here." The young miss didn't have a physical body now, but she still took 2 deep breaths. This journey was really too challenging. "I'll send you here. I hope you have a good time here." The dragon's words were normal, but looking at its 2 heads and 4 eyes, one could tell that this fellow was overjoyed. After saying that, it turned around and flew to the other side. After the dragon left, Thea had time to look around. As far as her eyes could see, there was at least 100,000 kilometers of land. She could imagine how powerful the people who had created this place were. But now, as far as her eyes could see, there were mountains and a large amount of vegetation covering it. Through the gaps between the trees, she could see traces of ancient buildings scattered all over the place. The departure of many powerhouses gave this small space a chance to breathe. Without those powerhouses absorbing the world's origin every minute and every second, The people they left behind lived a good life. However, this place was forcibly created. Without those powerhouses guarding it, the counterattack of the world's consciousness forced these people to retreat step by step. As far as Thea's eyes could see, she could only see traces of civilization in the valley about 2 miles to the west. In this world of psychic power, it was like a paradise, shining with so much light that even Thea's eyes found it dazzling. What breathed here was not oxygen, but color. Listening was not with the ears, but with the soul. It was a very comfortable place. Thea stretched her body. Not only did she feel comfortable, the holy sword in her body also transmitted waves of joy. The energy distribution in this spiritual world was very uniform, and the effect of training was the same everywhere. Thea did not intend to interact with the survivors, but she did not forget her purpose. Sitting cross-legged, she used a method from Sagan's memory to meditate. "Boss, you?" The dead man, whose spiritual power is far weaker than Thea's, finally recovers. Seeing Thea sitting cross-legged, he is a little confused. "What about me? What am I going to do? Can I leave now?" Boston Brand, welcome home. A blue-skinned old man suddenly appeared on the left side of the two. Thea raised her eyebrows slightly. Sensing that the other party had no ill intentions, she calmed herself down and continued to immerse herself in her own world. The old man continued talking to the dead man as if he didn't see Thea. "I've seen you in my dreams." The dead man, who was carelessly grabbed by the young lady as a key, finally remembered something and looked at the old man with some surprise. "When you were 5 years old, you were beaten up by your parents who loved drinking more than they loved you. After that, you begged for someone to take you away from that home. At that time, we heard your call. Your memory may have forgotten this place, but your heart is still here. Come, my friend, I'll show you around." The blue-skinned old man kindly extended his hand to the dead man. Thea nodded slightly, and the dead man walked to the other side with the old man. When they were far away, Thea's attention was completely focused on herself. She was no stranger to training her spiritual power. Whether it was learning from Madame Siva when she was a warrior, or pondering on her own after getting Constantine's spellbook, or recently obtaining Sagan's memory and Morgan Le Fay's spell slate, Thea has already summed up a set of training methods suitable for herself. Spiritual power is different from magic power. It may sound mysterious, but in fact, all intelligent creatures have it. It's just a matter of how much they have. Most creatures are trapped by the shackles of their bodies, and their spiritual power has always been suppressed by the various signals collected by the brain. What they see, hear, and think, every individual's brain is stuffed with this information. Except for a very few people with extraordinary talent, most people have been mediocre in their lives and have not discovered this ability. Mags have long realized the auxiliary effect of spiritual power on magic power. Physical attacks are the strength of the body, while spiritual attacks are exclusive to the soul. Spiritual power, magic power, and soul, they think that the three complement each other and are indispensable. When a mage's energy accumulates to a peak, the soul will leave the body, taking all the essence of the body with it, and walk to a new level of life. Whether it goes to a higher dimension, Thea does not understand, but the process of iridization recorded in many religious books is very similar to this process. This legendary realm, although not divine, is better than divine. Thea did not think too much about it. Those levels are too far away from her. She only wanted to improve her spiritual power, merge with her doppelganger, and return to her original self. The fusion of two souls gives her a natural advantage in spiritual power. Now that she has entered this spiritual space, coupled with the feedback of some energy from the Holy Sword from time to time, her progress is now 100 times faster than in the outside world. There is no sun rising and the moon setting here, and there is no passage of time. Thea sat alone in the same place, motionless. During this time, the dead people finished their tour and saw that she was still working hard, so they did not disturb her and left the space alone from the other side of the exit. Without knowing how long it has been, Thea's spiritual power accumulates very quickly without the shackles of her body. If it was only a trickle before, now it is like a pure lake. Just when she wanted to complete part of the fusion, the Holy Sword stopped her. It is not time yet. Thea can only continue to accumulate. With the growth of her spiritual power, the whole spiritual space is affected. The earth trembles, and the sky flashes. However, except for the blue-skinned old man who glanced at it from afar, the rest of the survivors did not care. For them, time is meaningless, and survival is meaningless. Living or dying will not make them frown. That is, Thea is busy with her own things, otherwise, she will definitely complain that these guys are so numb to the extent that they will not be surprised even if the sky falls. When Thea's spiritual power breaks through a certain threshold, the new function of the Holy Sword is opened to her. With the help of the special environment here and the emotions of the Holy Sword as a channel, she can now hear the pleas of many lives. As the chosen one of the moon god, she has the ability to hear people chanting her name at night. This ability seems cool, but it actually causes her a lot of trouble. Chapter 444. It was fine when she was unknown, but when her name became widely known, a large number of spam messages annoyed her. She was young, beautiful, talented, and wealthy. With so many advantages, how could she not be talked about? Unfortunately, her ability only worked at night. There were almost no people who sang her praises in the middle of the night. Most of the time, one or a few perverted men would call her name in a corner, and then they would have all kinds of fantasies, and even do some more disgusting things. This troubled her for a long time. These people did not deserve to die, and they did not even have anything to do with her. They just took advantage of her verbally. She could not kill them with an arrow from a distance, could she? The number of these unscrupulous people increased as her fame grew. She could not go crazy and kill them all. She had no choice but to divert a part of her mental power to block the reception function of her ears. The super hearing of the Kryptonians was also blocked because there was too much information. The starting point was different, but the purpose was the same. The young lady could only choose to block it. Now, with the help of the Holy Sword, she could almost hear the calls and prayers of all living beings. When she wanted to unilaterally close the information channel, the Holy Sword stopped her, as if it wanted her to listen to what those people were saying. "Are you sure?" Thea had to withdraw from the deep meditation. Meditating in the midst of hundreds of millions of voices? She did not have the willpower to do so, and she believed that not many people could do so. The Holy Sword's message was very warm, like an elder's relative. It was not forcing her, but encouraging her to try. Let's try. The skyrocketing mental power made her in a surprisingly good state. She could generate tens of thousands of thoughts in an instant. These were not messy thoughts, but orderly thoughts. She was like a supercomputer, doing countless calculations in a second. She was confident that she could take on some difficult challenges. As a humanoid terminal, she began to receive information from all living beings. At first, the Holy Sword only opened a small part of the channel. Seeing that she could handle it well, it slowly increased the speed of information infusion. "Alice, I don't know if you can agree to my date. Will Father come to watch my baseball game? God bless me to return with a full harvest." Countless requests poured into Thea's heart. Legend had it that the gods could respond to the calls of their believers and send down their power or avatars. At that time, she didn't think much of it, but now, Thea only lasted for half a minute before she wanted to curse. This was too tiring. She didn't need to do any further processing, nor did she need to make any response. Just the simple act of receiving the information caused her spiritual body to fall into a trance. Seeing that the Holy Sword had no intention of stopping, Thea could only continue to persist. Her clever mind quickly came up with a set of methods that were not really methods. Many people did not have strong intentions and were considered dispensable. She put all of these aside and prioritized those who had strong intentions. Anyway, she did not need to deal with them. She listened to them as quickly as possible and moved on to the next one. Thea's spiritual power was rapidly depleting. At the same time, those who had strong desires seemed to feel that their prayers were being listened to. They were in a good mood and unknowingly returned a portion of their spiritual power. With this replenishment, Thea's total spiritual power was decreasing, but she could still hold on for a while. During this process, she also heard many familiar calls. For example, Shadow was begging them to hold on to the brick wall. Laurel wanted to see her sister, Luther's secretary. She hoped that Luther would spare some time to see her. Most of the people's wishes were good. Of course, there were also many evil wishes. Thea directly gave up on them. Just as she was sifting through the messages, a golden light entered her spiritual world. This was an unparalleled call. The intensity of the will and the sincerity of the wish surpassed the sum of all the wishes she had dealt with before. My brother and I are trapped in the basement by bad guys. The bad guys are on their way to kill my father. I pray that God will give me the power to save our father. The image of a young boy appeared in Thea's mind. The person's voice was not loud, but his attitude, will, and determination exceeded the traditional definition of power. This was the only voice left in the spiritual power channel. The combination of the war eagle and the white dove, Donald Hall? Then the one next to him is his brother, Henry Hall? Through the construction of the medical cabin, Thea collected information on many people. She knew the brothers. They were not big shots in the world. The older brother was good at solving problems with violence. In Thea's eyes, he was just an ordinary person. However, the younger brother, Donald Hall, was an amazing person. His combat strength was negligible, but his holiness was unparalleled. Even the black lamp that swept across the universe could not shake him. Thea shook her head and chuckled. It seems that the war eagle and the white dove in the future were also made by me. Interesting. Combining the causes and effects, Thea knew what she had to do. She summoned the unicorn, the symbol of her light and holiness. The unicorn's spiritual body did not take human form. They were telepathic and understood each other's situation. Come on, Artaz. Merge with me completely. From today onwards, we are no longer separate. The unicorn licked the corner of her eyes with its large tongue. Thea tugged at her ear. She did not feel good about not being able to see this cute pet again in the future. However, thinking that this was a fusion and not a parting of life and death, she steeled her resolve. Wiping the wet corner of her eyes, the unicorn also sensed her thoughts. The human and beast had already merged before, so they only needed to adjust the resonance amplitude. Come on. Thea completely opened her mind and welcomed the symbol of the future that fate had arranged for her. The fusion of the two spiritual bodies caused the space to tremble violently. The mountains, lakes, and forests formed by spiritual power were attracted by her and turned into pure origin power, providing power for the fusion of the two. Thea's consciousness was operating at high speed, leaving behind her power and origin power. As for the qualities and holy characteristics, they were wrapped up by her layer by layer, turning into a dazzling golden ball. This was the purest part of her. Thea believed that as long as she absorbed this golden ball, her moral character would undergo an earth-shattering change. Justice was good, and people yearned for it. She could carry the whole world on her back and move forward. She had the courage, but Thea did not like that image. She did not like to be a pure and kind person. That was not her character. The brothers, especially Donald, are rare saints in the world. They should meet your standards. Thea seemed to be talking to the unicorn after the fusion, but also to herself. This time, the fusion was complete. She no longer had the golden helmet and golden armor. What followed was a drastic change in her life level. Perhaps she was still not as good as Superman Diana, but there were very few people on this earth who could match her. This golden ball was more or less contaminated with some of Thea's essence and a small part of the unicorn's ability. The power inside could completely change the Donald brothers. Chapter 445. Thea had wasted some time, but for the Donald brothers, not even a tenth of a second had passed. Following Donald's shout, before he could finish, a voice that was far beyond the limits of their imagination rang out in their hearts. Power, you desire power? Then I'll give you power. Thea did not intend to scare them, but she was too far away from the material world, so she could only communicate with them telepathically. However, she neglected the fact that they were just two ordinary teenagers, while she was not bound by her body, and her spiritual power had increased by 100 times, so the difference between them was unimaginable. Seeing that the two brothers were dumbfounded, Thea felt that it was a good time to throw the golden ball over from the other side of the passage. The golden ball automatically split into 2 parts according to her will and fused with the 2 brothers. The older brother, Henry Hall, received the larger part of the power according to his own wishes, while the younger brother, Donald Hall, received the heart of justice and holiness. The originally noble nature was now sublimated to a level that even Thea was amazed. This was not 1 + 1 = 2, but a qualitative change in faith. The soul of this young man named Donald Hall was overflowing with golden light. Even without testing, Thea could imagine that he was almost immune to soul magic and dark magic. It was too pure, and except for those who could not be named, no one could do anything to his soul. The 2 brothers both received the flying ability of adult unicorns, as well as physiques that surpassed ordinary people. The older brother received more power, while the younger brother received more virtue. When you're in danger, summon the war eagle and the white dove to awaken the power in your body. Go, do what you need to do. The flow of time between the 2 worlds was very different. One side flowed rapidly, while the other remained motionless. Thea had to do her best to stop the erosion of time, and it was very difficult for her to resist. She simply told the 2 brothers how to use it, and unilaterally cut off the connection. The noble qualities were not wasted, and the power was entrusted to those who needed it. Next, whether the 2 lived or died had nothing to do with her. They were not her family, friends, or subordinates, so Thea quickly put them to the back of her mind. Thea spent a lot of time fusing with the clone that represented the dark side. Thea's personality was more unique and unique. In order to extract her essence, Thea spent a lot of effort. Compared to the unicorn that represented light and justice, the dark element doppelganger was the one that resembled her the most. In order to prevent this part of her personality from being corrupted, Thea could only be extremely careful. Slowly, bit by bit, she analyzed the doppelganger bit by bit, leaving behind her mana and her elemental attributes. However, his several attempts to condense had all ended in failure. The magic power of the main body and the doppelganger was too deeply entangled. It was simply impossible to condense the magic power like the unicorn. The courage to do so. After failing for the 3rd time, Thea reached out her hand and stroked the holy sword. She knew that it was time for her to make up her mind. As she waved her sacred sword, a large amount of magic power wrapped around her clone's personality and abilities were forcefully sliced out of her clone's body. There were no visual effects of flesh and blood flying everywhere, nor were there any heart-wrenching cries of pain. All that was left was the trembling of her soul. That was really painful. Thea's spiritual body had been severely damaged, and her total amount of magic power had been reduced by 20%. However, looking at the black mist-like object that was still baring its fangs and brandishing its claws in the spiritual world before her, she knew that her work wasn't done yet. If she left it alone, this mist-like object would gradually grow stronger until it devoured this space. Then, if nothing unexpected happened, it would transform into a human form and return to the material world to madly seek revenge. No matter if it was Thea herself or the Holy Sword, she wouldn't allow this to happen. Thea stopped training her spiritual power and focused on dealing with the mist-like object before her. She couldn't give it to humans like she did with the unicorn. It contained a lot of negative emotions. Thea's idea was to create a dark element magic staff. However, she also gave it the meaning of healing. Logically speaking, such a contradictory concept shouldn't exist, but Morgan Le Fay's many spells had given her some guidance. This black magician who was proficient in healing took a different approach, combining the 2 extremes of magic with each other on the surface and the inside. This would be a magic staff of salvation. It would save others and also save oneself. Every time the user waved the magic staff to heal others, both the user and the magic staff would have a new experience. Thea extracted a portion of pure spiritual power from the space around her and used the Holy Sword's ability to turn illusions into reality to create the magic staff without any rest. The entire staff was dark gold in color. At the top of the staff, there was a golden snake curled up. Although it wasn't as good as Diana's forging ability, it wasn't difficult for her to make a magic staff. After an unknown amount of time, Thea sat down on the ground, exhausted. The magic staff was finished, but then came the problem. This was a part of her body. If she used it herself, It would return to her body in 2 days. All her previous suffering would be in vain. Then, who should she give it to? First of all, the user had to be of the dark attribute. Secondly, it couldn't be someone with ulcers on the head and pus on the soles of their feet. Lastly, it would be even better if the user was a woman. Through the holy sword, Thea opened up a spiritual power channel and listened to the wishes of all living beings. She began to search for the lucky person like an old grandpa. Facts told her that it was really not easy to be a qualified old grandpa. Some people had potential but no talent, and some people had talent but no potential. Without intelligent screening, without a search engine, she could only look around and try her luck. People who thirsted for power were everywhere. However, less than 1 in a million people had talent for magic. Thea didn't have the time to open the bloodline of those few people. She couldn't find anything after searching everywhere. She could only set her sights on the creatures of the small planes. She didn't dare to go to heaven or hell. People didn't want her magic staff that used the dark attribute to cast healing spells. Many intelligent beings in the interlayer spaces were her only choice. When her gaze swept across a small plane that was lower than the material world and higher than hell, a 3-headed, 6-legged monster with snake hair and 6 scarlet eyes attracted her attention. All kinds of negative emotions from hell filled this small plane. This place was filled with monsters formed by malice. Compared to these monsters, the one Thea saw was short and thin. Although its body was also formed by malice, Thea's spiritual power had increased by 100 times. She could still see a trace of light in it. This was probably the reason why the monster was so thin. Are you willing to help others? Are you willing to heal this world? Thea's question rang in the monster's heart. The monster was really shocked. It kept roaring, trying to scare away this invisible enemy. Can't you use telepathy? Thea was also helpless. She couldn't pretend to be an old grandpa anymore. She might as well just throw the item to the monster. Chapter 446. When the staff was about to leave her hand, Thea realized that she had to completely sever her relationship with the staff. From now on, the staff was the staff, and she was herself. It was best for them to have no connection. I am Asclepius, the god of medicine. You have the light that you haven't realized yet. You are worthy of redemption. I give you this staff. Save yourself, and I hope you can save the world. She did not leave her name, nor did she leave the names of Diana, the moon goddess, and others who were related to her. Instead, she borrowed the name of the god of medicine in Greek mythology. The son of Apollo, the god of light in the myths and legends, had never appeared in Thea's memory. Saving people with a snake staff was his standard image. Although she had used his name, it was a good thing. Presumably, he would not mind, right? On the other side, the snake-haired monster looked at the staff that fell in front of it. Its 3 heads searched up and down, left and right, but found nothing. Finally, it boldly grabbed the staff. Save the world, and save yourself. You have woken up from the abyss dream. From now on, your name is Nurse Nightmare. The snake-haired monster was affected by the residual magic on the staff. Its illusory body gradually shrank, and a somewhat vague female figure gradually appeared. Thea left a sentence that confused her, and unilaterally closed the passage. Like the brothers Warhawk and White Dove on the other side, these 3 people were not her subordinates. Whether they lived or died in the future, it had nothing to do with Thea. What they could do was entirely up to them. Although her magic was damaged, her spiritual power had increased by a lot. Thea was a little surprised. She was no longer a noob. Such an increase for no reason could only mean that her physical fitness had improved greatly after the fusion, and it was reflected in the spiritual world. She could not practice her spiritual power anymore. Her main purpose had been achieved. She needed to return to the material world to adapt to her new body. Sorry to disturb you. I'll take my leave now. The blue-skinned old man who acted as a guide for the dead people had been watching from a distance. When she stopped, the old man slowly walked over. Thea thanked him politely. The old man was very kind. You're welcome as well. From now on, this will be your home. Even Thea could not stand it anymore. She had absorbed at least 1/10 of the remaining spiritual power in this world. However, she was not regretful and was even welcome to come again. This made her feel a little ashamed. He had the heart to repay something. A check. They were all spiritual bodies, so they were definitely useless. Gemstones. Similarly, he couldn't bring it in. Thea was a little worried. Looking at their lifeless city, she suddenly had an idea. Let's create something for them to pass the time. They had no use for the few pastimes of modern society, so Thea directly used her spiritual power to shape them and used the holy sword to give them life. She created a lot of small animals. What made her sigh was that the first small animal she had unconsciously made was a unicorn. She felt a little sad, so she hurriedly composed herself and made a lot of pandas, raccoons, huskies, and other small animals that looked very silly and cute. I hope these animals can bring you laughter. Before Thea left, she had already seen a few residents of the city looking at the small animals in fear. Then, there was a burst of exclamations. She did not stay for long. Following the old man's instructions, she left this world from one side. This time, there was no two-headed dragon to perform acrobatic flying. Almost as soon as she took her first step, her body was already outside. It seems to be north of Nandabart Mountain. Thea was familiar with the mountain elder. She looked at the surroundings and determined her location. Now that she had removed her spirit form and returned to her physical body, it would definitely cause some strange phenomena. Thea quickly left the scene and stood in a nearby cave. Come. She held the holy sword in her hand and turned her wrist. The colorful brilliance of the sword instantly filled the cave. The body made purely of spiritual power quickly disintegrated. More than half of the spiritual power was rapidly changing its form. The transformation was only halfway done, and Thea felt that the surge of power had exceeded her previous peak. Moreover, as her body gradually solidified, the power was still increasing rapidly. Only a short time had passed in the outside world, but in the halo, Thea felt like a whole day had passed. She stood up, panting, and stretched her body a little. The side effect of the sudden increase in strength was that she could punch a hole in the mountain wall with a casual punch, and a deep pit with a little bit of force in her feet. The benefits of high spiritual power came with it. Her control of her body could be said to be superb. She began to familiarize herself with the most basic punches and kicks. In less than 5 minutes, Thea had familiarized herself with her current body. The loss of magic power was more than she had expected. The sword had at least cut off 30% of the total amount of magic power. In contrast, her physical fitness had increased by 2 times. There was no clear hierarchy in this world, but Thea was familiar with the understanding that she was familiar with. She was barely able to divide it into a few stages. There was a benchmark here, and that was Diana. Her strength should be at the level of a high-level demigod. Before Thea merged with her doppelganger, she estimated that she was at the level of a beginner demigod. Now, even without magic power, she could be regarded as a mid-level demigod only in terms of physical strength. If she added all kinds of equipment and magic, the gap between her and Diana would be very small. She had absorbed a part of the divine power of Horus, Isis, Ars, and Artemis, the 4 gods. Logically speaking, she should be very powerful. However, in the actual battle, without using magic, she had been suppressed by Diana. She did not show how powerful she was at all. Until today, when she merged with her 2 doppelganger, she suddenly realized that her strength had always been in a state of dispersal. Now, she had her true strength, or this was the strength she should have had. When she was a heroic spirit, she could wear the space ring, but she could not take out anything. However, all her clothes had turned into ashes. Now that she had returned to her normal body, she naturally did not have those clothes on her body. Thea looked at the indescribable position below her neck. She could tell that she was 1 centimeter taller. She did not have the effect of cutting her hair and washing her marrow. After all, her level was not low at all. The strength of her body was much stronger than that of the people on Earth. Just when she felt that there was nothing unusual, her eyes focused on her shoulders. Her long brown hair seemed to be shorter, and the color had turned into a dazzling golden yellow. She took out a small mirror and found that her originally light green eyes had turned dark green. She touched the top of her head and secretly rejoiced. Her hair was very soft, and there was no king's glory. She was still herself and had not become a strange girl. Thea's strange thoughts had not dissipated. She was a little surprised by the feedback in her blood. With the disappearance of the unicorn tattoo, her real talent that had been suppressed had awakened. Chapter 447. Brilliant colors appeared in front of her eyes. Even with a casual glance, she could see the traces of countless microorganisms and insects in the cave. With a little effort, she could see their internal structure. Plants grew tenaciously between the cracks of the rocks, and underground water flowed slowly in the mountain wall not far away. Thea blinked her eyes, and her vision returned to normal. With a thought, her wide-range vision was restored. The world in front of her was slightly different from what she had observed with the Eye of Horus. Whether it was the color, the details, or the molecular structure of things, as long as she wanted to, she could see it all. The Eye of Horus was gone. That was the only thought left in her mind. She was a little surprised, but more than that, she was happy. Her body returned to its original state after the heroic spirit transformation. In addition, she had merged with 2 doppelgangers in the process. The Eye of Horus was completely absorbed and assimilated by her body during this process. From now on, there was no Eye of Horus, only Thea's own eyes were left. Without the barrier between her body and her eyes, her spiritual power skyrocketed. Now, what appeared in front of her eyes was the real world observed by the divine eye. Without worrying too much about the changes in her eyes, Thea received the message from her bloodline. She understood her true talent. This talent was very complicated. It was not as simple and crude as Damien's and Old Mar's ability to deepen. It was also different from her previous unicorn tattoo. This talent had slightly touched on the level of rules. The balance of order. This was the name of her new talent. According to the bloodline, a golden balance would be erected in her spiritual world. The 2 sides of the balance represented order and chaos. There were many things that could affect both sides. Thea roughly read it with her spiritual power. There were hundreds of items, some praise and slander, some construction and destruction, some fairness and bias, and even some neatness and chaos. These things could all affect the measurement of the scale. When the order was heavier than the chaos, it would provide her with something called the power of will. The effect of this power of will was so great that there was no limit to it. It could change reality, distort space, turn nothingness into reality, stop time, and various other functions. However, the more heaven-defying the ability was, the more power of will it consumed. Order suppressed chaos, and the power of vow accumulated in the balance. When she extracted it, the balance would return to its original balance point, and a new round of measurement would begin. When chaos overpowered order, she gained nothing. She could only try her best to increase the weight of order. There was no punishment in this process, but there were also no benefits. She had to work hard to make order overpower chaos again. How troublesome. The thought that flashed through Missy's mind was, go back and buy the news media, then promote herself 24/7? Could it be that his company had transformed from a traditional construction industry to a high-tech R&D company, and now was going to enter a media company? That was a bit too big of a leap. Thea was a little embarrassed to buy the world's mainstream media. This idea could only be a joke. The country's system determined that the media had a lot of freedom. It was not uncommon for them to scold someone even though they were paid a salary. Some people even took pride in scolding their bosses. He couldn't buy that indescribable national media. Even if he did, they wouldn't say anything good about him. It was even more impossible for Al Jazeera to do business with him. This was just a beautiful dream. Thea observed the balance for a while. There were many people who scolded her, but there were also many who praised her. For example, the vast number of poor people who benefited from her medical pod. Quinn Group's medical pods were being spread all over the country. Surgeries that cost tens of thousands of dollars in big hospitals only cost a few thousand here. It was safe and efficient. Within half an hour, basic illnesses could be solved. This talent is really tailor-made for my personality. Thea couldn't help but sigh. She was used to making a fortune in silence. She was asked to do good deeds in public like a superhero. Today, she saved an old lady who ran a red light. Tomorrow, she would help a child find his dog. These were things that she couldn't bring herself to do. She was used to using the existing rules, maintaining the existing rules, and doing things in a planned way. She was not like a firefighter, running around the city and saving whoever she saw. To a certain extent, she and the superheroes had a conflict of ideals. Now that she had obtained this talent that emphasized order and priority, her ideals were further strengthened. She wanted to test the power of will. Unfortunately, both sides of the balance had just begun to move. There was only a little more order than chaos. The little power of will was not even as thick as a strand of hair. After calming down, she couldn't help but think about this strange talent. Although it was incomparably troublesome, its power was definitely extraordinary. She wasn't the son of God. With such a strong bloodline talent, even Merlin didn't awaken this level of talent when he was a wizard apprentice, let alone Damien and old Ma. After eliminating a few impossibilities, the only explanation was that her true talent had always been suppressed and was constantly changing as her ability deepened. Or rather, her talent awakening had never progressed to the final step. When the unicorn tattoo was removed and this talent appeared, it was already so strong that no one could compare to it. Others awakened their talents when they were mortals, but Thea was forcibly suppressed until now. Purely from the perspective of talent, she was probably the first demigod-level wizard apprentice in history. She checked her body on the spot. Although she was in a cave, there was still light. She still retained her ability to absorb sunlight and moonlight. Otherwise, she would rather be a warrior if she had to practice 18 types of meditation techniques a day like Mr. E. She took out a set of clothes from the spatial ring. Between flying back or teleporting back, she hesitated for a second. She was afraid that it would be troublesome, so she chose to teleport. She didn't return to Star City or the metropolis. Instead, she went directly to London. Diana bought an apartment here as her residence. "Have you settled your matter?" Diana, who was watering the flowers, felt the spatial fluctuation and asked without turning her head. "My strength has increased greatly now. Let's compete. It's still daytime. What are you thinking? Let's compete. Change your equipment and we'll find an uninhabited planet." Thea didn't allow any explanation as she pulled Diana and ran to an alien planet. Her physical strength could only be used freely in an intense battle. Diana helplessly put down the water bottle, carried her equipment, and followed Thea to an uninhabited planet. With a sword and shield in hand, fully armed was Diana's attitude toward battle. She wouldn't give up any equipment just because she underestimated her opponent. Thea knew this very well. She didn't use the power armor or buff magic. She just tied her hair into a single ponytail and didn't use the holy sword. Instead, she used the Godslayer that Diana was very familiar with. Be careful. Diana didn't take the attack head-on. She chose to dodge sideways. However, she underestimated Thea's speed. Just as she thought of dodging, Thea was already in front of her. Her competitive spirit was ignited. She also held the sword in her right hand and slashed at her. Chapter 448. The two swords were made by the god of fire and had the same origin. No one knew how many times they had clashed. However, Sia, who had always been knocked back, had only taken half a step back this time. The strong wind created by the collision of the two swords swept across the area within a radius of several miles. "Your power has increased by so much." As the person who knew her best, Diana was quite clear about her strength. The two of them had sparred countless times, and she was the one who had the most right to speak. "Indeed, this is the power that my body should be able to exert now." The benefits of the heroic spirit transformation were not only to train her spiritual power, but also to filter out the remnants in her body through the process of decomposition and reconstruction. The messy divine power that Thea had absorbed before came from different gods and even different divine systems. Although it was downgraded to magic power, there were still a lot of impurities in the energy. This decomposition and reconstruction was equivalent to remaking her body from scratch. There were no more remnants of Ars or Horus, and all the power belonged to her. Relaxed, soothing, and simple could be used to describe her physical condition. Even if it was just a simple comparison of appearance, she was not inferior to Diana. Objectively speaking, she was now like a new demigod. The effect of the reconstruction was heaven-defying, and the heroic spirit transformation was only one of the countless functions of the Holy Sword, and it was also one of the inconspicuous functions. From this, one could see how extraordinary the Holy Sword was. She needed to adapt to a new body, and so did her fighting style. It was like Batman knew Wing Chun, but he did not use it usually. This boxing style was not suitable for his burly body. Thea's skyrocketing strength was now facing the same problem. Many of the moves that used to be easy to use now felt strange when she used them. It was not the problem of the moves, but that she was no longer suitable for these moves. Diana did not hold back just because her moves were sloppy. She held a shield in her left hand and a sword in her right hand. She did not practice as many martial arts as Thea, and she was very familiar with a set of boxing style and a set of sword and shield attacks. Although Thea was very familiar with her martial arts, she was still flustered. Under the strong pressure, the martial arts she had mastered were also in a state of rapid integration. It was impossible for her to defeat someone with a move without a move. However, she was able to use the best moves of various sects. Whether it was the royal court swordsmanship or the Japanese swordsmanship, any move that was suitable for her was a good move. Get in the way. Sensing that Thea's strength was not much inferior to her own, Diana threw away her shield and held her sword with both hands, attacking like a storm. It turned out that Diana's overall strength was still higher than Thea's. Her strength, endurance, reflexes, and speed were all better than Thea's. The young lady could accept this fact. After all, although her magic power had dropped by 30%, she was still a mage at her core. It would be strange if a mage like her could fight against a pure warrior like Diana with her body. Based on her usual personality, she would have unleashed all her skills and fought for victory. However, after fusing with her two doppelgangers, she had gotten rid of all distracting thoughts. Her state of mind was very calm. It was no big deal if she lost, but it would be strange if she won. Move by move, she calmed her mind and tried her best to deal with Diana's attacks. From time to time, she would even counterattack. The two of them were fighting very seriously. Diana had not engaged in this kind of pure martial arts competition for a long time. In the past, Thea used to train with her using magic and martial arts. In the middle, she would add in fear impact from time to time. It was not the path of a pure warrior, which made her very sullen. There were not many people on Earth who could fight with her. Fiora could only be said to have known her through her relationship with Thea. It was okay to spar once in a while, but it was not okay to do so too many times. The two of them did not have such a friendship. As for Superman, Diana wanted to experience his skills. Unfortunately, Student Clark was so busy every day that his remaining spare time was filled by Louise. He did not have the time to spar with Diana. It could be said that after leaving the island for 100 years, this female demigod who was a warrior to her bones had been bored to death. Now that she saw that Thea's close combat ability had improved by leaps and bounds, in terms of happiness, perhaps she was not inferior to Thea. The two of them began to unleash their energy without restraint. One of them slashed a ditch with her sword, and the other punched a wind wall with her fist. On the desertified planet, rocks were constantly blown away by the aftershocks of their fight. The planet's atmosphere was also rumbling because of the aftershocks of the fight. It was as if a typhoon had wreaked havoc within a radius of 100 miles, and in the eye of the storm were the two beautiful ladies. The two of them fought for a long time. Even the demigod's body was a little tired. Diana took advantage of the moment when she turned around in the air to jump up and punch her. Thea realized that this might be her last punch. She also mobilized all the strength in her body. She twisted her waist and bent her arms. At the same time, she drew out a weak wisp of power of will from the spiritual world. She secretly said to herself, "I can do it, I can do it." A faint golden light wrapped around her jade-white arm. This light flickered slightly and disappeared without a trace, as if it had never existed. Bang! There was a loud explosion at the point where the two of them collided. An invisible shock wave swept out in all directions with the two of them as the center. Diana fell back to the ground. Her feet plowed a deep trench in the heavily weathered ground. She retreated more than 10 meters. Thea was in mid-air. She somersaulted 7 or 8 times before coming to a stop in the air. What a strange power. Diana had fought with Thea countless times. She was very familiar with several kinds of power that she had. This was not magic power or emotional power. It was a bit like divine power, but not exactly. Let's go. We'll talk about it in detail when we get back. After Thea finished speaking, she changed her clothes. The clothes she was wearing earlier were all torn. With their current fighting strength, ordinary clothes would be torn apart in a few moves. This was also the value of Diana's armor. Not to mention its defensive power, its blocking effect was just perfect. They returned to Diana's apartment through a portal. The two of them were covered in dirt. They took a simple shower. Both of them were exhausted. They had been fighting all day long, so they did not have the energy to do it today. They ordered takeout for 10 people. The young lady took the large pile of food under the surprised gaze of the delivery man. The two of them sat on the ground and chatted as they ate, as if they were on Paradise Island. Power of will. This seems to be something described in the religious scriptures, right? Diana asked in a muffled voice as she swallowed half a pizza. Sia was gnawing on a drumstick in an unladylike manner. This food was really dispensable to them. If they wanted to replenish their energy, even 100 servings wouldn't be enough. They were just greedy for this little bit of food. Power of will is the name I gave it. It's like this. Thea blabbered on about the effect of the ability, hoping that Diana could help her think of ideas. Although she was not as good as Batman or Luther, Diana was also blessed by Athena's wisdom. She was also quite intelligent, but she was more used to using her fists to reason. Chapter 449. As a female warrior born in the Amazon, Diana didn't know etiquette at first, but after more than 100 years in human society, she had learned a little. She wiped the oil stains on her hands and counted with her fingers to think of a solution for her. I think there are a few ways to get credit. First of all, eliminate discrimination between men and women. I've been doing this for more than 10 years. If you were to do it, the effect wouldn't be much. Diana was really worried about this matter, and Thea did not have any good ideas. She nodded. This was the general situation, and it had nothing to do with wisdom. Secondly, eliminate war, save children, and pay attention to the vulnerable, provide them with some work opportunities, provide free medical treatment, help people below the poverty line. It was obvious that Diana had been paying attention to these social issues, but her words carried little weight, and she did not have a good way to promote this matter. Not only did she have a headache over these issues, Sia also found it extremely difficult to deal with them. To put it in an exaggerated way, if she took Moira's speech during the mayoral election, there were tens of thousands of words on it. Every politician had promised a bunch of things to the voters, but it was still the same. For thousands of years in human society, there were so many people in high positions and selfless politicians who could not do it, and the two of them, demigods, could not do it. Thea pondered for a moment. The national gene injection was definitely not possible, but some special drugs that could cure terminal diseases at the genetic level could be manufactured and put into the market at a low price to see the reaction. I think. She was just about to speak when she was startled by a palpitating heart. Something seemed to have happened in a very distant place. Diana's level was high, but a pure warrior's reaction to abnormalities was not as sensitive as her. She saw that she was halfway through her sentence and carefully felt the changes around her, but unfortunately, she did not feel anything. Our world seems to have a hole in it. Thea had secretly made a lot of arrangements before. She did not know which one was activated, but her intuition told her that it was a big deal. The two women did not have time to talk. They flew out of the atmosphere, and Thea looked into the distance. At the same time, in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, on a small island in the Azores, the buildings that were originally full of indigenous style were crowded today. After the famous archaeologist Dr. Daniel Evans received mysterious financial support, he stole the trident of the Sea King Arthur Curry a few years in advance in the original time and space. He led a large group of media reporters to open the so-called Gate of Atlantis. What the reporters at the scene recorded was not a glorious era, nor was it a treasure of an ancient civilization. This middle-aged man with an elegant temperament opened a passage that had been sealed for tens of thousands of years. Countless giant creatures that had been sealed by the Atlanteans and the Greek gods were released from the passage. The cameras were pushed down, and a few reporters who were close to him were torn to pieces on the spot. The rest of the people ran away, but they forgot that this was a small island, and they had nowhere to run. The giant creatures did not touch Dr. Evans, who was already dumbfounded. It was not that they were merciful, but they wanted to continue mocking this upright middle-aged man. Thea saw this scene and secretly sighed in relief. Fortunately, when the barrier between the two worlds was broken, she sensed it. Otherwise, the casualties would be greater. She was the one who instructed the Court of Owls to transfer the mysterious funds that Dr. Evans received. Her purpose was to release the Greek hero Hercules, who was trapped on the other side of the passage, and obtain enough divine power of the Earth attribute to establish a complete magic cycle. Although it was Dr. Evans who stole the trident, and it was the giant creatures who bewitched him to open the passage to the balance of order, she was also an important participant in this matter. The weight on the side of chaos was heavily added, and both sides were almost equal, which made her heart ache. She asked Diana to put on her equipment, and she hesitated for a moment. It was not time for her to officially stand in front of all the media, so she also put on her hood, and the two women were directly teleported to the small island. From the time the doctor opened the passage to the time when Thea and Diana arrived at the scene, it was less than 30 seconds, but the situation had deteriorated to the extreme. The giant creatures seemed to be playing with toys, and dozens of humans were torn apart by them at will. The smell of blood on the scene was extremely strong. "Stop!" Thea shouted. The two of them suddenly appeared, and most of the ordinary people were already scared out of their wits. They did not notice them at all, but the giant creatures knew what was good for them. The two women were pure demigods, and they could not help but be vigilant. However, it was the young lady who shouted for them to stop. In fact, she did not have the intention to stop at all. She just felt that it was inappropriate to start fighting without saying a word, so she shouted to strengthen the momentum. These giant creatures all represented the consciousness of chaos. Killing one of them was greater than saving 100 ordinary people. At the same time, the sacred sword also transmitted a strong fighting spirit to her. Thea immediately made a decision. Today, she would use these evil descendants of the giants as the beginning of the revival of the sacred sword's glory. Thea held the sacred sword with both hands, jumped 10 meters high, and stabbed the sacred sword, which was overflowing with 7-colored light, into a red monster with wings and a bloody mouth in the middle of its body. The eyes on the monster's two shoulders were still confused. "Didn't you say to stop? You were the one who shouted so loudly just now, right?" However, before he could express his dissatisfaction, the sacred sword had already completely purified him. Taking advantage of the enemy's confusion, she separately beheaded 2 more winged creatures. Diana had been cooperating with her for a long time, and she did not hesitate. Like cutting a melon, she cut down a colorful monster that seemed to have the ability to turn invisible. Shameless surface demigods. Kill them. The leader of the giant creatures was a female giant creature with a snake's body and long hair. Her entire body was dark green, and she had 2 wings and 4 arms. Their population was not large to begin with. When they were sealed 10,000 years ago, there were more than 1,000 of them. Now that they had broken out of the seal, there were less than 50 of them. Unexpectedly, in the blink of an eye, 4 of them were killed by Thea and the others. This made the snake woman extremely angry. Visible ripples burst out from her blood-red eyes, and Dr. Evans, who was very close to her, was directly sent flying. Chimph, mental attack. Thea was very disdainful. This was her leftover skill. This skill was very effective against small groups of soldiers, and it was very cool to see a large number of them fall like wheat. However, it was not practical in a battle of the same level. No matter whether it was herself or Diana, both of them had extremely high mental resistance. If they focused their mental power on a single point, it might be effective, but if they spread it out in such a large area, the damage would be negligible. Realizing that the snake woman did not have much combat experience, Thea turned the footsteps that were originally aimed at her and exchanged 2 blows with a purple vine-like creature with mouths all over its body. This creature drilled in and out of the ground, and it took her some effort. She used a hard earth spell to delay the creature's drilling, and then swung her sacred sword and cut the creature into 3 pieces. She still felt that it was not safe, so she stabbed the creature twice more until it turned into ashes. Only then did she move on to the next enemy. Chapter 450. Surround them. Overwhelm them with numbers. The snake woman was obviously not good at hand-to-hand combat. She hid far away and began to command. From time to time, she would send out mental attacks, sound waves, and charm spells. As a few powerful monsters gave up on killing ordinary people and returned to the island, Thea and Diana were under more and more pressure. However, they did not complain. Thea felt that this was her fault, and she had no qualms about it. Diana felt that it was her duty to destroy these guys. The 2 women relied on their skillful martial arts and divine armor to deal with dozens of enemies. Their main targets were those who could fly and those who could turn invisible. They would kill these enemies first and deal with the remaining few who had thick skin and flesh. Be careful. Thea kicked Superman's good friend, Jimmy Olsen. Today, the Daily Planet sent this camera-turned reporter. This kid was really unlucky. The death-courting experts, Louise Ryan and Clark Kent, went to investigate another big piece of news. The newspaper office didn't believe that Dr. Evans could come up with anything new, so they sent the intern reporter to the Azores. This kid was indeed one of Superman's Iron Triangle. He was very lucky. There were not many people left on the island, but he was still alive and kicking on the front line. This guy was also very careless. He did not forget his job at all. He raised his camera and took pictures. The sound of his camera not only attracted the enemy, but also Thea. Seeing the enemy spit out acid rain, Thea could not watch this guy die in front of her. She gave up on the enemy and kicked him away. Stay away. Seeing that this guy wanted to ask a few more questions, Thea had to use Magician's hand to pull him away from the scene. She looked around and pulled Dr. Evans, who was holding a trident, to the side to accompany Jimmy Olsen. If you want to interview someone, you can interview the person involved. With the troublemaker gone, the battle had reached a stalemate. Thea and the others could no longer move as they pleased. The enemy had cunningly used a few large monsters to block their movement space. Fear had little effect on these evil and chaotic creatures. After the 2 girls worked together to slay a monster that could absorb life force like seaweed, they finally stood back to back, panting. Originally, their physical strength had not recovered after the battle, and now that they were in a bitter battle, they could only use 60% of their usual strength. It was extremely difficult for them to fight. Hold on, I think reinforcements are coming. Thea cut off a monster's arm with her sword. No problem, I can still hold on. Diana used a lasso to catch a monster, pulled it in front of her, and stabbed it to death. Stop. At this time, another roar came from the beach. Unfortunately, the monsters did not fall for it anymore. We may be naive, but we are not stupid. You humans have shouted for us to stop twice in less than 10 minutes. You want us to fall for it twice. How could this be? The group of people continued to besiege the 2 girls as if they didn't hear anything. What happened? Give me back my trident. The Sea King, Arthur Curry, who had swum for tens of thousands of miles, landed on the island like a god descending from the sky. The result of his loud shout was that no one cared about him. He was a little puzzled and happened to see Dr. Evans holding the trident. The middle-aged man also knew that he had made a terrible mistake. If the 2 girls had not jumped out to fight to the death, who knows what would have happened. He threw the trident back to the Sea King. Arthur, I'm sorry. You can kill me, but please help the 2 girls. They can't hold on any longer. The Sea King wanted to see who was being besieged, but the group of giant creatures surrounded him. He did not have the ability to fly, so he stretched his neck to look at the outside for a long time. He could only see that the fight was lively inside. From time to time, broken limbs of monsters were sent flying. He stood for a while, but no one cared about him. Arthur, come and help. He could not see, but Thea saw him with her supervision. Although he was not as good as Superman, he was still a strong general. Hearing Thea's voice, the Sea King breathed a sigh of relief. He knew the combat power of the two girls and knew that they would be fine for a while. There was no need for him to go in and save them. If they could not hold on, he would be a dead end. His combat awareness was good. He looked at the enemies on the battlefield and found that Thea and the girls were prioritizing those who could fly and run fast. He immediately understood the intention of the two girls. Thunder flashed on the trident, and he attacked a winged monster. Not long after he joined the battle, Malar, who was always by his side, also arrived. The island was not big, and it was surrounded by seawater. Her ability to control water was at its peak, and countless water and ice arrows rained down on the giant creatures. The continuous killing of the four of them was indeed extraordinary, but injuries were inevitable. Thea had taken off her hood, revealing her long golden hair. The hood could be used normally, but it blocked her vision when she was surrounded. Although she used all her power, her right hand was still injured, and she could only hold the sword with her left hand. The giant creatures were the descendants of giants and Gaia's evil consciousness. They had surprisingly high magic resistance, mental resistance, and physical attack power. They had almost no weaknesses, and Thea could not use many of her methods. She could only fight with brute force. If she had not merged with her doppelganger, which increased her physical attack power, it would have been more difficult to deal with these enemies. Diana wasn't having a good time either. She was injured by an arrow shot by an enemy that looked like a purple-skinned tree. There was a bloody hole in her sturdy thigh. The enemy's attack was extremely corrosive. Even with her demigod body, she couldn't recover from it and could only fight with a limp. If she had known, she would not have fought with Diana. Thea felt that after Merlin abandoned his sword, her luck was a little bad. If the two of them were in good condition, they would not have to fight so hard. Use the power of will. She alone had killed 7 or 8 giant creatures, and the order scale was very satisfied. After cancelling out the matter of secretly supporting Dr. Evans, there was still a lot of power of will left. Recover our physical strength and injuries. Thea chanted silently. In a place where they could not see, an obscure white light shone, and the two girls' physical strength rapidly rose. However, their injuries were only half healed, and before they could fully recover, their power of will was exhausted. They threw 2 more healing gems, and more or less relieved their injuries. The snake woman had been observing the situation from the periphery. At this time, she smiled sinisterly, and her sharp teeth shone with a cold light. Greeks and Atlanteans? Do you think that only the giant creatures are your enemies? Too naive. I'll let you see a real nightmare. This friend who has been with us for tens of thousands of years, he. Before she could finish her sentence, the entrance of the passage that they had escaped from was suddenly blasted open. Rubble flew everywhere and smoke lingered in the air. The violent reaction of divine power startled Diana. Sia hurriedly flew over to protect her, and only then did they manage to resolve the danger. Amidst the deafening roar, a muscular figure rushed out from the tunnel. Chapter 451. In front of a group of monsters that were a few meters tall, the 3-meter-tall man who rushed out was not conspicuous, but the power that overflowed from his body was enough to attract everyone's attention. The man's head and waist were wrapped in animal skin, and his naked upper body was full of explosive muscles. 2 ferocious dragon heads were used as shoulder pads, and through the animal skin, one could see his bearded face and a pair of crazy eyes. Even if one could not see his face, one could feel the oppressive feeling in the air. Hercules. Diana was really a little surprised. This was the interesting part of Greek mythology. Other than a few old ones, the rest were all brothers and sisters. They were all created by the loving Uncle Zeus. Whether it was Apollo or Ars, including Diana and Hercules in front of them, their mothers included all kinds of races and levels. There were mortals, demigods, and true gods, but there was only one father. Diana did not expect that other than ours, she could see another living brother who was very mechanically dealing with the attacks of the giant creatures. She looked at Thea. The Missy also pretended that she had just found out. She was 70% puzzled and 30% shocked. She was not a child of Zeus, so this expression was just right. Kill. Kill all of them. They are all traitors. Think about the despair you felt when they betrayed you and you were alone in the abyss. The snake woman did not dare to get too close to Hercules. She only used her charming voice to stir up his emotions from afar. Hercules' gaze became crazier and crazier. His chest was undulating, and the steel-like muscles all over his body were visibly bigger. Even from afar, one could hear his heavy breathing. "Ah, Atlantean, I'm going to tear you apart." Hercules looked around. Just like when the Sea King first arrived, he did not see the two women who were surrounded by a few giant creatures that were as big as mountains of flesh. Instead, he saw the Sea King, who seemed to be very muscular and was attacking fiercely with a trident in his hand. This guy must be his enemy. Without thinking, Hercules stomped his feet violently on the ground, creating a gust of wind as he raised his huge fist at the Sea King. The Sea King had heard Diana's exclamation before, and he knew that she was a god who was famous for her strength. If she had been an ordinary person, he would have punched her back with his fiery temper. However, he chose to avoid the mighty Hercules. His plan was very good. He wanted to build up his strength in one go, weaken in the second, and exhaust in the third. Unfortunately, he underestimated the power of Hercules. If he only relied on 3 axes, this son of Zeus, the Lion of Olympus, who was not favored by Zeus, would not have lived to this day. Having fought against the giant creatures alone for 10,000 years, his physical strength was almost limitless, and his martial arts had also reached the peak. Although he was now driven crazy by the giant creatures' whispers for 10,000 years, his fighting strength was not affected in the slightest. The combination of punches forced the Sea King to retreat continuously. In less than 10 moves, he grabbed the Sea King and raised him above his head, intending to tear him apart. "Let him go." The 3 women, for different reasons, came to the rescue at the same time. Mia's eyes were almost red, and ice arrows as thick as an arm rained down on Hercules. Diana also threw out the lasso of truth, binding one of his arms. Thea also took out the silver moon bow, narked Zeus' lightning arrow, and shot an arrow at Hercules' chest as fast as lightning. The Sea King, who was raised in the air, was not completely helpless. His natural ability allowed him to control all aquatic creatures. When he saw a giant creature that looked like a catfish beside him, he did not care about anything else and directly took control of it. His ability was indeed powerful. The other party only resisted a little and was controlled. Then, it opened its bloody mouth and bit down on Hercules' head. Hercules only felt his vision go black, and his vision was covered by a stinky object. He wanted to tear this unknown object away, but his arm was tied up by Diana, and his body was shot by Thea. The familiar smell told him that the arrow contained his father's divine power. In addition, Mia had opened a few holes on his body, so he had no choice but to throw the Sea King out. After struggling for a while, Diana's strength was also not bad. She pulled the lasso tightly. Hercules' right arm did not move at all. He could already feel the giant creature under the Sea King's control biting his neck. He used his free hand to hit the giant creature's head. His heavy fists were like thunder, and every hit made a bloody hole in the giant creature's head. An unknown liquid gurgled out. "Very powerful. I underestimated you." The snake woman was still watching the show. She did not expect a blue lightning arrow to directly penetrate her chest. Before she could say a word, she was shot to death by Thea. "I've hated you for a long time, trash." Thea spat out a mouthful of turbid air. In the midst of the chaos, she shot 2 arrows. The one that was shot at Hercules was a simple arrow, while the one that was shot at the snake woman was a real lightning arrow with magic power. No matter how high their magic resistance was, they could not ignore Thea's strongest attack. Moreover, this fellow was only good at charm. Her own strength was weak. A big hole was opened in her chest, and she fell to the ground with a look of unwillingness. Without her secretly controlling and commanding, Many of the giant creatures that were not so smart fell into chaos. Thea and Diana finally fought their way out of the encirclement. Mia, come help me. Diana, go help Arthur. They had basically killed all the giant creatures that could fly. The remaining ones were all ground units. Mia's ice arrow was actually a physical attack. Together with Thea's lightning arrow, the two of them were most suitable to deal with the remaining giant creatures in the air. Diana was also eager to chat with this crazy brother. Holding a shield, she replaced the Sea King who was in danger. Thea was dealing with the enemies below while paying attention to Diana's battle. After a few glances, she discovered the problem. Diana's hands were tied, and there was a gap in strength. She was like a bowling ball, fighting from the east to the west, and then from the north to the south. Thinking back to the original time and space, the Sea King seemed to have defeated him underwater. She immediately shouted, "Pull him into the water, Arthur can defeat him underwater." The Sea King gave her a thumbs up, which meant that she had good taste. Thea began to continuously shoot arrows at Hercules' back. Diana's lasso showed its power again, and Mia also controlled a large amount of seawater to help pull. Some pulled, and some pushed. The cooperation of the three women was really good. Hercules' feet plowed 2 deep trenches in the ground. He roared repeatedly, but the three of them were determined to pull him down. No matter how angry he was, it was useless. Plop! Thea dug a hole under Hercules' feet. He missed a step and stumbled. Diana suddenly exerted her strength, and the Sea King also pulled with her. The two of them were like a tug-of-war, dragging Hercules into the water. "Leave this to me, you go help too," Thea said to Mia. The couple's combat power underwater was immeasurable. She was too lazy to go underwater, and these targets on land were left to her to deal with. This arrangement was the most suitable since she could gain glory and willpower. Chapter 452. Malar looked at the battlefield. There were only a few enemies left that could not fly. Her ice arrows were not very effective against these thick-skinned monsters. She nodded. "Be careful." With that, she leaped up and dove into the depths of the sea to help the Sea King with a graceful dive. Even though they were separated by layers of seawater, Sia could see the intensity of the battle below. The Sea King, who was almost invincible in the water, was blocking the Hercules. Diana could only do some supporting work, and with Mira also entering the water to fight, she was a little helpless. Diana was not worried that the Sea King couple would kill Hercules. She swam out of the water to help Thea clear the monsters on the island. Without Hercules' interference and without the Snake Woman's control, these giant creatures that only knew how to destroy were no match for the two women who cooperated with each other skillfully. Diana used a trap, while Sonia used a holy sword. Diana used a sword and shield, while Sonia used a bow and arrow. The two of them could switch between melee and ranged attacks at any time. A monster fell to the ground every 10 seconds. The fewer there were, the less pressure the two women felt. Thea used her power of vow again to recover some of their strength and injuries. Finally, they killed all the ancient monsters. The sea in the distance was still rolling with huge waves. It was obvious that it would not be easy for the Sea King couple to take care of the Lion of Olympus underwater. However, Thea was not worried about them. As long as there was seawater, the two of them had almost unlimited recovery. Unless they were the kind of people who could kill in one move, not many people could defeat the Sea King underwater. Moreover, the deduction of a portion of Sia's research funds to support Professor Evans was caused by the Sea King randomly throwing the trident around, which was why someone had taken advantage of the loophole. The couple was destined to be in trouble this time, and Sia had only brought this matter forward slightly. The scene was a mess. Thea had purified the monsters at first, but later found that purifying also consumed some of her strength. She quickly turned off the purifying function. At this time, the central area of the island was full of monsters that had been killed by them. There were all kinds of monsters, and none of them were similar. Some were bleeding, some were bleeding purple, and some were directly turned into stone. "You're the one from Quinn Group?" Jimmy Olsen, who was not far from the battlefield, heard that the commotion had died down. Together with Dr. Evans, He gathered his courage and came to observe. He had good eyesight and immediately saw Thea, who had taken off her hood. "You've got the wrong person," Thea replied without thinking as she was dealing the final blow to the monsters. Now that her hair had turned blonde and her looks had improved, Jimmy Olsen was still in shock and wasn't very sure. At the same time, he felt that it was a little beyond his imagination for a billionaire to come to such a godforsaken island to maintain world peace. However, he was still prepared to return and talk to his good friend, Clark Kent, about his near-death experience today. Thea used her supervision to observe the vicinity of the island. After confirming that there was nothing left out, they went into the water to help the Sea King couple. "We can deal with him." The Sea King didn't know what Thea was doing behind his back. He thought that the trouble this time was caused by himself. He was already very grateful to the two women for helping him clear the monsters on the island. If he didn't do anything, he would feel ashamed. He wanted to take down the big guy in front of him with his own strength. Originally, his strength had increased exponentially underwater. Now that there was some pressure, he was able to exert 1,000% of his strength. It wasn't that Hercules couldn't fight in the water, it was just that he wasn't used to being off the ground. One of their strengths increased while the other decreased, and they began to beat each other up, unwilling to admit defeat. The huge current was turned into a whirlpool by the two's powerful strength. The fishes and shrimps had long fled. Malar's eyes were emitting a blue light. Her superpower was used to the extreme. From time to time, giant monsters formed from seawater would pounce on Hercules. Looking at the crazy Hercules, Diana hesitated and asked Thea, "Can he still recover his consciousness?" Thea had thought about this problem before and made several plans. Now that she saw the real person, she only felt that it was several times more complicated than she expected. Hercules's will was as hard as steel. It was difficult for such a person to be corroded, but once he lost his mind, it would be even more difficult to recover. The snake woman who was shot to death by her arrow must have been corroded by thousands of years to slowly disintegrate Hercules's mind. Even so, she drove Hercules crazy instead of becoming a puppet under her control. From this, one could see how tenacious Hercules' will was. "If we can subdue him, we can go to the Martian hunter. He is one of the strongest telepaths in the universe. Let's see if he has a way. If it doesn't work, I can try to use my power of will to see if I can change reality." Groot's telepathic ability was more about control. When he was under control, he was a normal person. When he was no longer under control, he would still go crazy. The Martian hunter was the best choice now. Diana nodded silently, and the two returned their attention to the battle. After half an hour of fighting, the Sea King and his wife defeated Hercules with difficulty. Hercules' body was harder than steel, and his recovery ability was top-notch. The Sea King's trident left wounds on his body, but Hercules recovered very quickly. It was impossible to kill him. Relying on his unlimited physical strength, Hercules' last bit of strength was exhausted. The Sea King elbowed him in the face. Hercules' eyes were closed, filled with madness and murderous intent. This warrior who dominated the gods with his strength was finally knocked out due to exhaustion of his physical strength. The Sea King heard the conversation between the two women and happily handed Hercules to them. "Arthur, everything is my fault." The four of them carried Hercules, who weighed tons, back to the island. Dr. Daniel Evans apologized to the Sea King with a guilty look on his face. The four of them did not blame him too much. This person was not a bad person. He was just too focused on his own research and was bewitched by the giant creature. They came back to the place where the seal was broken. Originally, they could put the trident back and reseal it. However, when Hercules came out, he had completely destroyed the barrier between the two worlds, so the trident was useless. The three of them could fight and kill, but when it came to the matter of sealing, it was up to Missy. They looked at Thea together. Thea also did her research. The other side was equivalent to a different world the size of a town. Now that all the prisoners had been killed by them, there was nothing on the other side. It did not matter whether they sealed it or not. However, Thea still used her knowledge to redraw the sealing enchantment on the spot. Because the giant creature had been there for thousands of years, The air on the other side was filled with madness and evil. If they did not seal it, there would be a few more villains if those auras entered this world. The result of her rich theoretical knowledge was that she was familiar with it. It was easier than sealing the hole in Nandabat. Using the original specifications of Atlantis, Thea quickly resealed the passage. Chapter 453. From now on, this island will be a forbidden area, and your trident will still be the key to unseal it. Under the watchful eyes of a few outsiders, Sia easily drew countless irregular lines. A purple energy lightly swept across the scene, causing the aura of madness and chaos in the air to immediately stop spreading. Diana and the others were fine, but Jamie Olsen and the other survivors were dazzled. They didn't know what was going on, but they thought it was awesome. As for the forbidden area that she mentioned, they still had lingering fears. No one was going to come to this broken island again, and whether it was forbidden or not had little to do with them. The surrounding sea was affected by their battle. The waves were still turbulent, and there were still countless whirlpools under the water. The warm-hearted Sea King called the survivors to board the ship, and they carried the ship underwater and left the sea. Thea and Diana said goodbye to the two and watched them leave with the survivors. The noisy island quieted down. Only the destruction of various energies and the flow of corrosive blood destroyed the little vegetation on the island. Lady Natasha first put a bunch of sealing spells on Hercules, and then put on a large number of high-tech confinement devices from the Heaven's Eye Society. Amanda could use these things to trap ferocious Wolf Rob, so it should be effective against Hercules as well. Under layers of confinement, even if Hercules suddenly woke up, his violent counterattack would not be lethal. Thea first checked Hercules as if he was mentally ill, and then she picked the largest medical cabin and put him in. After scanning for a long time, the result was no use. The human's experience in treating mental illnesses was completely ineffective against him. This guy's brain was not damaged, but there was a problem with his soul. It could not be cured in a hurry, so she needed to go back and slowly think of a way. Thea told Diana to look after him. She still had to deal with the bodies of the giant creatures on the island. The bodies of these guys were extremely evil. If they were thrown to the hands of the Cold Flame Church, they could make at least 100 magic tools. They were all curses, chaos, and confusion. There were too many problems left in the world, so purifying them was the best choice. All the bodies were gathered together, holding a holy sword, and silently adjusting their state. Thea softly chanted the inscription, and the holy sword responded at the same time. A large amount of light gathered at the tip of the sword in an instant. Thea's own mana was rapidly transforming. This light was not the light of the illumination spell that any mage apprentice could cast. It was a spiritual light formed by the will of all living beings. It was the light of wisdom, the light of the soul. Thea had a feeling that if this light continued to upgrade endlessly, its final point might be the light that God said should have light, the first light that represented the entire world. Of course, she was only purifying the corpses of some monsters. There was no need to make such a big deal out of it. Even if her magic power increased by 10 times, it would not be able to reach such a level. Thea's current strength could shake the earth, but in the eyes of those powerful beings, she was not much stronger than a microorganism. She obediently withdrew part of her magic power. The entire island was shrouded in light. Not far from the island, the survivors and the Sea King couple also stopped what they were doing and stopped to watch. Nuclear bomb. Jimmy Olsen took out his camera and snapped 2 pictures. Unfortunately, the lens was filled with white and nothing could be seen. He could only ask Daniel Evans, who was beside him. Although he was a PhD in archaeology, he was still a PhD. Jimmy felt that his experience today was similar to that of a movie. The protagonists survived all kinds of hardships, and then the government destroyed all the evidence with a nuclear bomb. It was no wonder that he thought so, because this was the plot of such movies. Evans had been an archaeologist for many years and had more or less come into contact with supernatural things. His PhD title was not just for show. He forced himself to explain with his own worldview. It's definitely not a nuclear bomb. Maybe they want to sink the island to the bottom of the sea, or burn the corpses of those monsters. The PhD immediately deduced 5 or 6 possibilities and said with lingering fear. The rest of the survivors also began to talk. Thea, who was on the island, did not know that she had become the focus of their debate. She only felt that her intention to fight secretly was completely ruined. As she injected her own mana into the holy sword, a huge beam of light was produced on the island. The beam of light with a radius of 1,000 meters shot straight into the sky. The overflowing light was reflected to the entire North Atlantic Ocean. Not to mention the satellites of various countries, even the nearby Spanish people in Portugal could see it with their naked eyes. The sea moved without wind, and countless fish floated to the surface. They did not eat each other, nor did they fight. They just enjoyed the rare peace. The seabirds were singing happily, and the eagles, who had always been at odds with Thea, also joined in. As the spirit of all things, humans more or less felt that something was wrong. Many people stopped and asked each other if they heard the sound of the Scottish bagpipes in the air. A few ancient temples deep in the mountains rang with the sound of bells, and many devout churches and monasteries vaguely sang a song. The media all over the world was alarmed, and several major religious organizations immediately claimed responsibility for the incident. The spiritual leader of a Central Asian country even spoke on the news channel for 1.5 hours, laying out facts and reasoning, just to prove one thing: he was the one who did it. The young lady did not know that she had not finished her work yet, and there were already a bunch of people waiting to take the blame. She only had one feeling at this time: this holy sword was too flashy. Even if her total mana was reduced by 30%, it was still far more than the current generation of mags. Even so, under the premise that she had reduced the power of the holy sword, her current mana was still consumed by more than half. Feeling that the light energy had been accumulated, it was more than enough to purify the bodies. Thea did not see how much force she used, but she held the sword with both hands and pointed the tip of the sword at the center of the pile of bodies. The beam of light was like an iron needle piercing a balloon. With the point of impact as the center, the space spread in all directions. All the places covered by the light energy quickly disintegrated, and the bodies of the giant creatures were like soup splashed on snow, quickly melting in front of her eyes. 2 of the giant creatures had been pretending to be dead, or it was a conditioned reflex, and they even shook their legs. Unfortunately, the melting speed was too fast, and their struggles were meaningless. They were disintegrated one by one, and the beam of light purified the evil in their hearts and bodies. Large masses of pure energy overflowed from these ancient evil objects and dissipated into the air. Thea leaned on the holy sword. She was sensitive to the magic in the air. Although it was still very thin, it was much richer than before. "What's wrong? Are you hurt?" Diana was not so sensitive. She thought that Thea was injured because of the previous beam of light. Before Thea could answer, a rough voice came from not far away. "Daughter of Zeus, your companion is fine, but she has purified those giant creatures. The whole world will benefit, but trouble will come with it. It's hard to say if it's lucky or unlucky." Hercules, whose face was full of stubble, slowly sat up. It could be seen that the restrictions were still in effect, but his originally crazy eyes were still a little turbid, but overall, there was a bit of brilliance of wisdom. Chapter 454. You're awake. You recognize me, don't you? Diana was in high spirits and said happily. However, Hercules disappointed her. Because of her sword light, I only temporarily recovered a part of my consciousness. The burden on my soul is too heavy and I'm afraid it will be difficult for me to recover. If I leave this place, I will still be that crazy beast. Diana clenched her fists. Thea and I will heal you, Thea. Only then did she realize that Thea only said one sentence and didn't respond. This was too abnormal. She hurriedly looked back and saw Thea standing there with a slightly distracted gaze. She didn't say anything, as if she didn't see Hercules recover his consciousness at all. "Daughter of Zeus, don't disturb her. The giant is the product of the giant and Gaia's evil consciousness. She purified the evil consciousness and Mother Earth, Gaia, is rewarding her." Hercules hadn't spoken for tens of thousands of years, so his words were a little unclear. However, Diana still understood. What Mother Earth, Gaia? She was a little skeptical. This was the original god at the level of Zeus's grandmother. Was she still alive? If Thea could hear Diana's thoughts at this moment, she would definitely reply that Mother Earth was no longer alive in the traditional sense. Thea was also proficient in theology and could even take the exam for a doctorate in theology. As the one who experienced it personally, she immediately realized that she had met Gaia. The other party's manifestation was very strange. It was between existence and non-existence, between existence and non-existence. At least at Thea's level, she couldn't understand the other party's state at all. It wasn't accurate to describe it as Gaia's consciousness. With Thea's narrow vision, she could only think that the other party had merged with the Earth. The manifestation now was more like a subconsciousness. The imagined day trip to the Earth's core, the small movie of the birth of the giant, the big reveal of the ancient myths, none of these were present. The other party's consciousness was very fleeting and mechanical, as if it had completed some kind of setting. It returned a large amount of divine power to Thea and then disappeared as if it had never been there. Missy couldn't wait to laugh 3 times. Divine power was very valuable, and such pure Earth-type divine power was even more valuable. Thea had originally planned to obtain some from Hercules, and she had even come up with several plans to do so. Now, she had no intention of planting anything. This mass of divine power was extremely pure. Not only could it activate Thea's Earth attribute, but it could also activate her own mana cycle. It could even restore her to the state before her mana cycle was split. This was much better than carefully starting from Hercules. Thea was very happy, but she did not immediately absorb it. Previously, the Holy Sword had caused too much of a commotion on this island, so they needed to immediately evacuate. Hey, are you awake? When Thea's consciousness returned to reality, she also discovered Hercules' state. Diana explained to her in a low voice. Let's go back to my place first. I have more equipment there. Thea directly teleported Diana and Hercules back to the metropolis. As soon as they left the island, Hercules' expression began to distort. His eyes were wide open and his teeth were chattering. Release part of your consciousness, I will knock you out. Hercules, who was in pain, nodded slightly. Thea used her strongest spiritual attack and released a spiritual storm in his spiritual world. The strong man did not even make a sound and directly fainted. Thea did not have time to talk to Diana. She immediately checked. Using a hole that Hercules had specially opened, she extended her spiritual power in, trying to find the real cause of his madness. After searching for 3 minutes, Thea's forehead was sweating. The spiritual world of Hercules was too wide. Countless images of people filled it. There were praises, insults, love, and hatred. There were also projections of many legendary divine objects in his spiritual world, such as the golden apple and the golden fleece. Of course, there were also powerful enemies that he had killed. Thea's spiritual power saw the 9-headed Hydra. Its scarlet eyes peeped at her through Hercules' spiritual world from an unknown timeline. Thea snorted. It was just a stupid snake. She was no longer the naive person she used to be. She was not afraid when it was alive. Why would she be afraid when it was dead for so many years? She searched for a full 10 minutes. The spiritual world of Hercules was as vast as the sea. With her current spiritual power, it would be very difficult to search. Her spiritual power would increase exponentially if she turned into a hero spirit. However, the Holy Sword had released such an earth-shattering attack and needed to rest. It could not provide her with enough energy to turn into a hero spirit. Thea used the spiritual connection to find the Martian hunter and told him her intention to ask for help. You want me, an alien, to save an ancient god on Earth? The Martian hunter did not know whether to laugh or cry. However, he had been on Earth for many years and had heard many stories about Hercules. In his heart, if he could save Hercules, he would definitely be a great general on the side of justice. He did not say anything and said that he would be there soon. However, Thea and Diana waited and waited. After 4 hours, the 2 women finally saw the Martian hunter who would be there soon. This person had found a mission in the metropolis at the last minute. After that, He had disguised himself and sneaked all the way here. I say, Uncle Ron Jen, you flew here in less than 3 minutes, right? You're too careful. Thea was now familiar with him and said teasingly. The Martian hunter glared at her. You were the one who did what in the Azores, right? What were you doing there? Thea bragged about her heroic deeds as if she was showing off her achievements. She was very magnanimous at the moment. Even Gaia recognized her achievements, which meant that she had done a good job. Naturally, the Martian hunter could not find fault with her. Realizing that this was the fault of the human scholar, he could only sigh. He's so strong. When he saw Hercules' height, weight, and muscles as hard as iron lying there, the invisible aura made the Martian hunter feel a little moved. Although the Martian hunter was good at telepathy, his strength was comparable to Superman's. The fact that Hercules could make him feel pressured already showed that Hercules was not ordinary. Thea explained what she had found out about the inquiry. Do you think that the giant creature still has an image in his mind? Yes, you call it the mind. We mags call it the spiritual world, and shamans call it the spiritual world. They're all the same. They're all the inner parts of intelligent creatures. Thea first unified the customary terms of both parties. Then, she continued, it's not necessarily just one. I think there are many different kinds of enemies from different periods that are polluting his spiritual world. It's just that he could rely on his iron will to suppress all the evil intentions. However, after tens of thousands of years of corrosion, his willpower has been disintegrated, and the evil intentions have jumped out to pollute his mind. The Martian hunter thought about it after listening. Some things were different from his worldview, but the general direction was similar. He did not dwell on it too much and began to examine it carefully. Chapter 455. Although Thea had obtained many techniques and methods to use the power of the mind from the Martian hunter, she mostly used her mental power to control it, which consumed her body. The Martian hunter, on the other hand, was different. This was his natural ability, just like Thea's order balance and the Sea King's control of aquatic animals. His telepathy consumed very little energy. In terms of numbers, he was much stronger than the current Thea. Even if he was not as good as the hero spirit, the difference was not big. With his natural ability and low energy consumption, his search was more efficient and faster than Thea's. There are indeed many tainted bodies of consciousness affecting his mind. What do you want to do? Uncle Ron Jen, can you resolve it with your ability? It's difficult. I can try if there are only a few of them, but there are too many tainted things in his mind. Thea leaned against the wall and began to think. The other party was not her, so it was impossible for him to use the hero spirit to get rid of the impurities and preserve the essence. It was impossible for him to use any simple method. I'll do it with you. We'll use our own methods to get rid of as many tainted bodies of consciousness as possible before we can't hold on any longer. There was no good way. It was a little stupid, but the Martian hunter did not have any good ideas either. Let's do it. The Martian hunter's consciousness entered first, and Thea followed behind him. The two of them split up to search for the tainted bodies of consciousness. Thea soon saw a 3-headed hellhound that looked like it had been skinned. It was not difficult to defeat this thing in the spiritual world, but it was much more troublesome to completely destroy it. Thea shot the monster dead 3 times in a row, but it just shook its head and stood up again. The tainted bodies of consciousness were too closely connected to Hercules' main body. Every time it died, it consumed Hercules' consciousness. Simply killing it was meaningless, and there was even a tendency for it to worsen. Thea looked at her abundant willpower and took out 1/10 of it. A bright white light shot out from the spiritual body's finger and flew straight into the hellhound's body. The Cerberus body turned sluggish in an instant, and with a series of pixelated ripples, the Cerberus collapsed completely, reverting back to the consciousness of Hercules. Staunch, tenacious, brave, this small consciousness had almost all the qualities that a warrior could have. In a flash of light, it turned into a Hercules who had shrunk countless times. He held a sharp axe in his hand, nodded at Sia to express his gratitude, and ran to the other side. It seemed that there was a natural connection between the consciousness and the contaminated consciousness. Thea followed closely and soon found another contaminated body. The one holding the axe was fighting with the contaminated body. Looking at the power of will in her hand, Thea saw that it had consumed almost half of the power of will. Without any hesitation, she sent the power of will into the polluted body. Just like the previous scene, a body of consciousness with 2 swords in its hands jumped out again. Very good. This was purification, turning the enemy into one of their own. With one less enemy, their own side would gain 1. This was a battle in the spiritual world. If it was in the real world, the other side would have gone crazy. Not caring about the consumption of power of will, Thea directly transformed 18 contaminated bodies, leaving some power of will in case of an emergency. She signaled for the others to move freely. She had already discovered that these positive bodies were different from their external spiritual power. They could completely kill the contaminated bodies. Perhaps this was the common saying, whoever started the trouble should end it. She hurriedly ran back to the entrance. Her spiritual power and power of will were almost depleted. She had to retreat. Halfway through, she saw the Martian hunter showing off his power. In the spiritual world, the Martian hunter showed his true form. He had green skin, a purple cloak, and scarlet eyes. If one only looked at his appearance, this guy had the temperament of a villain. His spiritual body was more aggressive than Thea's. Realizing that conventional methods could not kill the opponent, he chose a new method. In this spiritual world, he used his powerful talent and understanding to forcefully dig out a deeper spiritual space. Those contaminated bodies of consciousness were all beaten half to death and then thrown in. It would be best if they could survive on their own, but if they couldn't, it could be considered a temporary quarantine. This method was not bad. Thea's eyes lit up. Sure enough, each of them had their own tricks up their sleeves. The Martian hunter was indeed a master of telepathy. Hercules was not an ordinary person. He was a god with a will as strong as iron. Not many people had the ability to punch a hole in his indomitable spirit. The battle between the wills was like a tug-of-war. If one side was weak, the other side would naturally rise. As the contaminated consciousness kept being locked up, Hercules' main bodies will finally responded. More positive bodies joined the battle. Thea, who had originally wanted to retreat, also helped to fight. After half an hour, the Martian hunter, who had the support of his talent, could not stand it anymore. There were too many enemies. He firmly sealed the deep spiritual space and asked Thea to retreat. "How are you? Are you okay?" Diana, who could not help at all, asked nervously when she saw that the two of them were a little tired. "It's better than expected. It's all thanks to Uncle Ronjen." Thea did not take the credit. The help provided by the other party was much greater than she had expected. The Martian hunter was really exhausted. His psychic ability was strong, but his recovery was not fast. Unlike Thea, who could rely on fear and emotions and could recover easily, he needed time to slowly recover. "Thank you for your help." Hercules, who was in a coma, had already woken up. At this time, his consciousness could be said to have suppressed the negative emotions. If he wanted to fully recover, he would need a few more treatments. If he was not stimulated, normal communication was no problem. The few of them briefly introduced each other. Hercules was very polite when he was normal, especially when he saw that the 3 people in front of him were not weak. Diana was not to be mentioned. The daughter of Zeus was also not bad. Thea was also a strong person in his eyes. If she was in his era, she would be a demigod hero. The Martian hunter was the one who attracted his attention. Hercules did not know that this guy was afraid of fire. In his eyes, the Martian hunter was simply impeccable. Whether it was the strength of the body or the power of the soul, they were perfect to the extreme. Was this the current Earthling? "What do you mean by luck and misfortune?" Diana asked hurriedly when she saw that he had regained consciousness. Previously on the island, they did not talk about it in detail. Diana had long wanted to ask. Hearing this, Thea and the Martian hunter turned their attention. Thea was busy purifying and did not know that they had a short conversation before. "The Giant's will has returned to Gaia. The world's barrier has become thin. This means The gods are about to return. Chapter 456. The Return of the Gods. The three of them were a little horrified. The Martian hunter was an alien, and he could only say that he knew about Earth's mythology. Most of the so-called knowledge here was the knowledge that Diana had popularized to him. Thea could perceive that the magic content in the air was increasing. Although it was only a flash in the pan for the long existence of Earth, it was distributed among 6 billion people. She also associated it with the emergence of mutants in the next few years. She didn't believe that it had nothing to do with this matter. Diana was only left with shock. It was a surprise to occasionally see a brother, but if there were hundreds of them, she would go crazy. Although she had been in human society for many years, with the broadening of her vision and the change of perspective, she was no longer very convinced that the idea that ours was behind the human wars. But deep-rooted thinking was not so easy to change. She was 30% expectant of her brothers and sisters, 60% fearful of them, and there was still a feeling that she couldn't explain. Haha. But you don't have to worry. Not all of them are interested in this world. It takes time to wake up from the kingdom of God and accumulate strength to come here. The lion-like man laughed heartily, suppressing the malice in his body. He now felt unusually relaxed and couldn't help but say a few more words to them. He seemed to have thought of something, and his expression became a little more serious. But a long time ago, there was a prophecy that the eldest son of Zeus and Hera would step on the corpse of his brother to ascend to the throne of the Father God. This prophecy corresponds to all the children of Zeus. Amazon girl, you are also in the prophecy, so you have to be careful. After that, Hercules laughed self-deprecatingly. Zeus, that coward who likes to play tricks, his father Kronos overthrew his grandfather, and he overthrew Kronos. Now it's his turn to be overthrown, haha. Hercules had no respect for his father. It was as if he was talking about an unimportant passerby. But it was not his fault. Zeus, the main god, was too philanthropic. He had created a huge pantheon by himself. 80% of the heroes, demigods, and true gods in Greek mythology were related to him. This big boss was too good at creating. Troubled times, Thea had to sigh. Compared to the new gods in the Apocalypse Star, the ones who were about to jump out now were the old gods. They could barely be regarded as minor problems. Their divine power was weak, their abilities were easily restrained, they had almost no power of faith, and their personalities were particularly strange. Now was not the ancient times. As long as they did not jump out at the critical moment, the Earth's current power was not afraid of them. The only thing to worry about was the firstborn. This was Diana's strongest opponent in the original space-time. Thea estimated that this firstborn, who even Zeus was afraid of, was stronger than Diana and Hercules. He was the first child of Zeus and Diana. Unlike Diana and Hercules, who were only demigods, he was born as the most powerful god. But as Hercules said, there was still some time. The so-called arrival of the gods sounded scary, but in fact, it was just a few gods who did not give up trying to make their presence known. Hercules wasn't prepared to explain too much. Perhaps it was his personality that didn't like to talk too much. He didn't waste any time talking nonsense with them. He lay down on the ground, wrapped himself in a tattered animal skin, and fell asleep. He did not treat himself as an outsider and directly made a bed on the floor of Thea's laboratory. The three of them could only walk out. What is the level of the gods that he mentioned? Will they harm the Earth? The Martian hunter asked the two girls in a low voice. Diana looked at Thea and saw that she had no intention of explaining. She could only answer herself. According to what I know, their fighting power will not surpass Hercules. If they harm the Earth, then it's hard to say. The gods' thinking is different from ours. The Martian hunter did not comment. He only told the two to be careful and left alone. In the next few days, Diana did not return to London. She stayed in the metropolis. On the one hand, she wanted to talk more with Hercules and learn more about the inside story. On the other hand, she was afraid that he would suddenly attack and Thea would not be able to handle it alone. Thea was also afraid that something would happen to Hercules and that it would affect his fighting power. She did not directly absorb the divinity of Gaia. Instead, she was going to wait for him to get better. Unlike Diana, who could slack off in her work, she had disappeared for a month. She had a lot of work to do. In the past, she could send her doppelgangers to attend some boring banquets and meetings. Now that her power had increased, but her doppelgangers were completely gone. She could only do it herself. In a certain banquet hall. Haha. The young lady was wearing a sapphire blue dress and silver high heels. She covered her mouth and chatted with several female counselors in a very ladylike manner. In the banquet over the past few days, the focus of the discussion had been the aurora on the Azores. The few of them talked a lot, saying all kinds of things. Aliens were attacking the Earth, the government's new weapons, and some kind of treasure had appeared. There were all kinds of theories. Even Sia, the initiator of all this, felt that there was a hole in their heads. She felt that someone was watching her. She turned around slightly and saw the dark-skinned Amanda standing not far away. She was giving her a look. She smiled and said goodbye to the few idle people. Then, she walked toward Amanda. Both of them were smiling. When they reached a place where no one was around, Thea put away her dignified manner. "Big sister, what's the matter?" Amanda looked at her with a half-smile. Thea's skin was as thick as a city wall. She was not moved at all. "You're the one behind the Azores incident, right?" "Yes." Ever since the shocking light beam of the Holy Sword appeared, Thea did not plan to hide it. The battle had lasted for more than half an hour. Not to mention the reporters at the scene, the satellites of various countries would have captured some footage. As her strength increased, there were fewer things she was afraid of. "One of my scientists was doing an experiment at the time. Because of your righteous act, he became like this." Amanda handed Thea a tablet as she spoke. On it was a real-time feed. However, Thea did not see anything strange after looking at it for a long time. A high-end laboratory? What was she supposed to see in the dark? Knowing that she didn't understand what she meant, Amanda was shocked when she first learned the truth. In layman's terms, he's invisible, but according to our equipment, he's still in this room. His body has mutated, and now he can absorb all light. If I'm not mistaken, the main culprit is your light beam. How is that possible? Nothing is impossible. This Dr. Wright loves to study all kinds of light. Cosmic rays. When you were messing with the light beam that attracted the attention of the world, he seemed to have caught a trace of. Amanda said, a little depressed. Chapter 457. Despite Avatar's convincing explanation, Thea was still in disbelief. What a joke! That was the light of purification from the Sword of Victory and Oath, the supreme holy sword of Celtic mythology. Now you're telling me that a human scientist captured a ray of light through technological means? This was not light in the traditional sense. This was the light of wisdom, the light of desire. What kind of technology could capture this kind of light? She had planned to fool Avatar, but now Thea's curiosity was piqued. She had to see this rare thing. Avatar wanted to use her knowledge to heal her subordinates, while Thea wanted to see this strange scientist. The two hit it off and soon arrived at the headquarters of the Heaven's Eye Society. Other than Lara Michaels, the only other person who came to greet them was a black man, Dr. Mist. This man was covered in light green magic circles and wore a red cape. He looked serious and unsmiling, standing there like a statue. Even Avatar, who was his direct superior, did not look at him, let alone an outsider like Thea. Thea found it funny that he was pretending to be an expert. The man's ability to reflect all spells was a joke to her. He would not be able to withstand any spell that was slightly more powerful. However, since he was a member of the Heaven's Eye Society, Thea was in no position to comment. "This is the place." Lara led them to a room. When she pushed the door open, the room was even darker. Thea guessed that the man was being assimilated faster for some reason. "Save. Save me. This thing is eating me." A middle-aged man's voice came from the room. However, his voice was very faint, as if he was talking through a blanket. Thea quickly left the place. Avatar and the others did not know what she was going to do, but they quickly followed her. After walking for a few hundred meters, Thea stopped. She looked into the distance and heaved a sigh of relief. What's wrong? Is it going to explode? Avatar could not help but think. Thea was stunned for a moment before she realized that they had misunderstood her. She found it a little funny. It's not an explosion. I don't know how he did it, but I do have something to do with your doctor's condition. If I get too close to him, his assimilation speed will start to accelerate until he becomes a beam of light. No one can help him. He can only save himself. Have him design a costume that produces light so that he can absorb it. After that, it would be best if he stayed in a dark room. What should we do now? Amanda asked. Use your strongest searchlight on him. When the light energy in his body accumulates to a certain level, his body will regain its balance. Don't worry, it's not a big deal. I'll be leaving first, Thea said casually. On the way back, she felt that it was very strange. This unlucky guy who had absorbed the light from the holy sword was probably Dr. Light. Thea was really curious as to how the other party was able to collect such extraordinary light. Was this also a sign of the coming of the great era that Hercules had mentioned? Realizing that her purification had caused a lot of chain reactions, Thea felt that the incident with the Heaven's Eye Society was not a coincidence. Perhaps something had happened to other people in other places that she did not notice. She sat in her office and ordered the artificial intelligence. Organize all the strange things that have happened in the past few days. Gideon searched quickly. Various hospital archives, traffic reports, forum news, and gossip were quickly recorded. Thea browsed quickly. A homeless man died in a high-end conference center? Isn't this? Injured people in a zoo, 3 dead and 7 injured. This doesn't seem to be a big deal. As she browsed quickly, a piece of news finally caught her attention. 3 days ago, 2 hours after Thea released the light beam, meteorologists believed that the ocean currents in the North Atlantic Ocean were disturbed. The originally calm sea surface was affected and kept accumulating energy. When this energy moved to the east coast of the United States, it turned into a downpour and a thunderstorm hit the metropolis. A very famous radio host, Leslie Wales, stubbornly took a helicopter to do a live broadcast on that day. The strong storm destroyed the helicopter. At the critical moment, Superman stepped forward and saved the woman. Unfortunately, she was really unlucky. After Superman pulled her out of the helicopter and landed on the ground, a bolt of lightning struck Superman. Superman reacted quickly and pushed her away in 1/10 of a second. However, he did not expect that there was a wire next to their feet. The lightning in the sky passed through the wire and struck the broadcaster. Student Clark, who was struck by lightning, was fine. He did not vomit blood nor did he transmigrate. However, Leslie Wales, who was not far away, did not have such a physique. She was electrocuted on the spot and died not long after being sent to the hospital. Hee. Thea shook her head and smiled bitterly. She was really a butterfly this time. When she flapped her wings in the Azores, there was a thunderstorm in the United States. Based on her intuition, Thea felt that the woman was not dead. There was no breath at that time. It was just the process of her body readjusting. Dr. Light was closely watched by the Sky Eye Society, so it was difficult for her to make a move. However, this woman was not a problem. Her ability was very similar to the Electric Man from Marvel Next Door. She could control and absorb electricity. With more effort, she would be a useful subordinate. She picked up the phone and ordered Death Knell to move the woman's corpse out. Half an hour later, Thea saw her target. She had to admit that it was a bit tragic. Her whole body was carbonized. Her clothes hung on her body in pieces and her hair was all white. The person who dealt with the corpse did not pay much attention and only roughly wiped it. She could barely tell that it was a woman from the appearance. Is there something special about this person? But she seems to be completely dead. I've seen her program before. It's not bad. It's a pity. Death Knell leaned on the table and asked. Not to mention that he had seen it, Thea had also seen the program hosted by this lady. In order to cater to the market and attract attention, she scolded Superman every day. Many people, such as Thea, had secretly watched it. She suspected that Batman had also watched it. Lex Luthor also watched it on time every day. It was not easy for ordinary citizens to count, but she had a place in the hearts of superheroes and villains. From the big picture, this woman was vulgar and unscrupulous. In order to curry favor, she could be said to be unscrupulous. She was definitely not a good person in the traditional sense. In fact, thinking about it carefully, one could also see her helplessness. She came to a place like the metropolis alone to make money and become famous. If she did not have proof and a resume, who would hire her? After several considerations, she chose to be a streamer. The next step was to choose a target. This program had to have a selling point, right? This woman's characteristic was that she was good at sarcastic. Who was she sarcastic about? Sarcastic about Thea? Sarcastic about Luthor? Half an hour later, she was put in a sack and thrown into the river. She did not dare to scold these people in power. At this time, Superman, who was also very famous and would not take revenge on her, entered her sight. Once the program was broadcast, it was indeed well received. Miss Wales seemed to have found a golden finger. Following that, she could not stop scolding Superman until today. Chapter 458. Thea's supervision allowed her to see inside her body. As a biological symbol, her blood circulation had been completely destroyed by the raging electric current. All her organs were basically carbonized, and only her heart and lungs were still beating slightly. This was the result of the residual electric current assimilating with her body. However, this process was extremely slow. In theory, she would be able to come back to life in 17 or 18 years. Of course, this was under the premise that her body had not been buried or destroyed by someone. Taking into account the fact that she was thrown into the morgue alone without any attachments, it was obvious that she would not have survived if she had followed the original path. This woman was similar to Poison Ivy. Both of them had external objects entering their bodies, causing irreversible changes in their life forms. The only difference was that Poison Ivy's life force was too strong, while this woman's life force was too weak. Connect her to the nutrient solution, max output. Thea signaled death knell. 3 thick needles were inserted into her severely necrotic skin, and various nutrients were injected into her almost dried-up body. 10 minutes later, Thea saw that her heart was wrapped in a layer of electric current, and it began to beat slowly. Does she have any abilities that are worth your attention? Death Knell asked thoughtfully. She can control and absorb electric current. When the electric current in her body reaches a certain level, her explosive power and speed will increase by a large margin. She can shoot out electric shock waves, and she can move between charged objects at high speed. Thea roughly explained a few points that she had thought of in a short period of time. Oh, that sounds good. But she must have some weaknesses, right? Of course. After gaining power in a short period of time, her mentality will definitely be unstable. Another is that she is extremely afraid of water. She can easily wipe out a fully armed American army, but she can also be defeated by a group of kindergartners with water guns. Seeing that Death Knell's expression was a little ugly, Thea hurriedly changed her words. Kindergartners are a little exaggerated, but the fire brigade can definitely defeat her. Then you still intend to recruit her? Thea did not answer immediately. The electric lady was the kind of person who had both advantages and disadvantages. Even without a great scientist, those who had studied for a few years would know how to deal with her. However, the other party's advantages could not be ignored. Now, the densely packed electrical equipment in the city would provide her with a huge amount of energy. Her mobility and destructive power were unparalleled. Thea thought for a moment. She'll be a great assistant if she's trained well. Oh right, she'll probably need to be trained for a few days. I can't stay here for too long. I'll leave the ring with you and return it to her when her arrogance has worn off, Thea said as she handed Death Knell an imitation yellow light ring. As evening came, the electricity lady's carbonized body continued to crack. Her charred skin fell to the ground and shattered. The newly exposed skin was almost transparent. The place where the blood vessels should have been was now replaced by electricity. Where am I? The electric lady sat up in a daze. First, she clenched her fists and looked at the electric current passing through her palms. Then, she looked around in shock. In the distance, there were dozens of fully armed burly men standing upright. They were all equipped with various instruments that he did not understand. A certain organization's base. This was her first thought. Had she become an experimental subject and been modified in various ways? It was no wonder that she thought so. American movies were full of such plots. It was hard for her to not go astray. Miss Leslie Wales, do you still remember what happened before? I saved you. Otherwise, you would be lying in the morgue right now. Thea saw that her eyes were a little unfocused. However, she did not scream like a lunatic. Thea felt that this was good news. You are. The electric lady's gaze automatically skipped over Death Knell, who was 2 meters tall and had a body like a bear. This was not because Death Knell was weak. In the original timeline, he was known as the greatest enemy of the young Titans. Death Knell, who was the nemesis of the brats, was no joke. Carrying 2 swords on his back and looking fierce, if it was in the past, he would have scared the former streamer out of her wits. However, today, the electric lady's gaze was still attracted by Thea. Unlike Diana's classic martial style, Thea had entered the middle stage of the demigod realm. Her appearance was more in line with modern aesthetics. Coupled with her rich knowledge, her overall temperament was raised by another level. Even as a female, it was rare for her to have feelings of jealousy. It was just that Thea would usually use magic to change some details in public so that her appearance would not be so stunning. Now that she was in her own base, she did not need to use magic to hide her appearance. What she showed was her original appearance. You know me, right? There were some differences in the details, but the overall appearance was the same. The electric lady's body had been modified. Her vision and hearing had improved greatly. She asked with uncertainty, "You are that billionaire? Are you the one who caught me here? None of you rich people are good people." Her tone was normal at first, but no one knew what she was thinking. As she spoke, she became so angry that her voice became shrill. The lights in the base flickered because of her. What should I do? She seems to hate the rich. Death Knell watched the show happily. He was not worried that she would go on a rampage and kill him. Now that his agility and strength had surpassed the limits of a human, he was not afraid of any metahumans. Moreover, this was a person who did not know the immensity of heaven and earth just because she had some abilities. Thea did not comment. The electric lady did hate the rich, but it was more of an electric current that affected her emotions. She could not control herself. I am a god. The electric lady became angrier the more she thought about it. What little rationality she had left was replaced by a crazy electric current. Her eyes rolled back and she floated in the air. The electric current in the base was crazily converging on her body. A few guards seemed to want to rush in, but they were stopped by Death Knell. Thea was speechless. This guy was different from Dr. Light. Dr. Light was a middle-aged man with a wife and children. He had a happy family and a good income. He was a middle-class person. This broadcasting lady was not doing well. She had been looked down upon by all kinds of people in her life. If she was not taught well, she would definitely become a villain. Blue light flickered between Thea's fingers. Water shield technique. A layer of aquablue film covered her body. Amidst the violent electric sparks, the former broadcasting lady could no longer maintain her elegant posture. She fell to the ground like a salted fish. Her whole body was trembling. She had been short-circuited. Why can't you listen to me? I told you, I'm here to help you. Think about your previous experience. If it wasn't for me, you would have been dead. Thea squatted beside her and said slowly. The electric lady was not sure if she was speaking the truth, but she felt weak all over. It was true. The raging electric current disappeared, and her cautious personality appeared again. She had never seen magic before. She thought that Thea had done something to her body. That was how it was portrayed in movies. Thinking that she had become a fish on the chopping board, she became completely obedient. She showed a fawning expression and waited for Thea to continue. Chapter 459. Good girl, stand up on your own. Don't make me do it myself. Thea was taller than the Lightning Lady. She stroked her hair as if she was petting a cat. The Lightning Lady's body was numb. She had already forgotten that she was shouting that she was a god a minute ago. She stood up trembling like a quail. Thea waved her right hand and used a simple water extraction spell to suck away all the remaining water on the Lightning Lady's body. Seeing such an unnatural scene up close, Miss Leslie Wales did not dare to act rashly even though the electric current in her body was running again. Very well, control your temper. What I want to say is that you're not a god. You're just a lucky guy. If it weren't for my help, you'd still be in the morgue. Me. As her mind cleared, she finally recalled the electric shock. Superman didn't save me. Thea laughed. This was the typical attitude of the citizens of the metropolis. They usually scolded Superman loudly, but when something happened, they felt that Superman should save them. How much did they pay him to be a nanny? It could be said that these people were spoiled by superheroes. Unfortunately, Superman didn't save you. Of course, his ability doesn't include healing. At that time, you were already in a state of suspended animation. He didn't notice. The Lightning Lady looked at the surroundings. It was creepy no matter how she looked at it. She asked hesitantly, "Can I go now?" Thea laughed. "What do you think?" The Lightning Lady's emotions rose again. She gathered a large amount of electric current between her hands again. "You can't stop me." Thea looked at her watch. She still had to eat with Diana later. She really didn't have time to waste with her. She signaled Poison Ivy, who had just walked over, to deal with her. She walked out herself. "Don't go." A dazzling electric light struck Thea's back. This kind of attack was scattered and messy. Thea didn't look back. She directly set up a magic barrier behind her. It blocked the electric light without any ripples. The aqua-blue teleportation door opened. She stepped through it and left the underground base. Where did she go? Thanks to the huge amount of information in the current society, a living person just disappeared right in front of her eyes. She had only seen such a bizarre thing in novels. Could it be that the portal just now was? No one answered her question. A huge plant emerged from the floor and wrapped her up in 3 layers. "Poison Ivy, you broke my floor again," Death Knell said speechlessly. Poison Ivy, who was walking over from afar, shrugged her shoulders and didn't seem to care at all. "Is this woman our new companion? What a bad temper. I'll leave it to you. I still have things to do." Death Knell threw a ring to Poison Ivy. Thea left it behind. "Give it to her when the time is right." Seeing how Death Knell ignored her and walked away, leaving behind a woman with green skin and red hair, Electric Lady felt that she was being looked down upon. "Don't go." She tried to release the electricity around her to burn this strange plant that was binding her. However, she miscalculated. Poison Ivy's plant wasn't from Earth but from a peace-loving, high-tech planet. It didn't have any special abilities other than absorbing electricity. It could absorb anything that was related to electricity. Poison Ivy didn't intend to use it in battle and only kept it for fun out of curiosity. Now that it had come in handy, even she was surprised. Let me go. Let me go if you dare." No matter how hard Electric Lady released the electricity, the plant in front of her looked half dead, as if it would turn into charcoal in the next moment. However, after 10 minutes, Electric Lady's continuous discharge was a heavy burden on her body. She didn't know how to communicate with plants, but she could observe that the plant in front of her had undergone many subtle and indescribable changes. Poison Ivy was overjoyed. The joy of the plant was her joy. She was still cheering for Electric Lady. "Continue, don't stop." Thea left Electric Lady's violent temper to Poison Ivy's slow-witted temper. She was prepared to teach her a lesson. She shouldn't always think that the heavens were number 1 and she was number 2. The prosperity of the metropolis had returned to normal. The citizens on the streets and alleys resumed their daily lives. Thea left the underground base and was currently shopping crazily with Diana in a nearby store. Both of them were extremely tall. With their height and good figure, they could always wear long skirts as short skirts. Even though many of the clothes looked good, they couldn't fit the two of them. This had always been their problem. Of course, the young lady could call 100 assistants to buy clothes for her, but Diana enjoyed the pleasure of shopping, so she followed them out without a care. Long-sleeved ladies' blouse, round-collared autumn and winter long-sleeved wool coat, casual professional trousers, spaghetti straps, miniskirts, long boots, and various high heels. They didn't care if it was useful or not. Both of them bought a huge bag. Hey, you're out shopping too? What a coincidence, what a coincidence. The two of them bought a huge pile of clothes. The clothing store owner personally escorted them out of the store. They bumped into Clark Kent and Louise Lane. Diana habitually greeted them. The two of them didn't expect to bump into each other on the streets. After all, no one had supervision and super hearing 24/7. Although Thea had changed slightly, her overall appearance hadn't changed. Those who had seen her before could still recognize her. On the surface, she and Clark knew each other, but they weren't close. However, Diana shouldn't know Clark. Louise Lane turned her head to look at her boyfriend in confusion. Then, she looked at the extraordinarily handsome Diana. Her mind was filled with questions. "I'll explain later." Bro Superman smiled sheepishly. Seeing that Thea and Louise were about to leave, he quickly stopped them. "Thank you for saving Jimmy. It's my treat. Let's have dinner together." Louise seemed to have thought of something but didn't interrupt. The two girls looked at each other. They hadn't eaten dinner yet. "Let's have a big meal together." Clark Kent wasn't a poor man. His family owned a farm, so he didn't need to hire anyone. He alone could take care of 10,000 people. In the metropolis, the Daily Planet wasn't a street tabloid. By reporting first-hand information about many superhumans, Clark received more bonuses than the editor-in-chief. He held a very high position in the hearts of the media workers. Otherwise, the scene of Luther urging him to shake hands with Bruce wouldn't have appeared in the movie Dawn of Justice. Aside from his identity as a hero, not just any Tom, Dick, or Harry was qualified to shake hands with a billionaire. There were even rumors that this year's Pulitzer Prize would be awarded to him. Louise Lane was a stealthy rich woman. Because of her father's fame, the merchants didn't dare to take her money for fear of being captured by her father for human experiments. Plus, after working at the Daily Planet for so many years, she spent little and earned a lot. It was hard for her not to be rich. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.